Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of BCS Community Connections. Today on the podcast, we have brought in Salvation Army, and I have sitting across from me Lieutenant Timothy Israel. And so Timothy oversees the local, we'll call it BCS. I mean, That's just how we like to refer to everything in here, but the Bryan College Station chapter of the Salvation Army. And so what an appropriate time to bring you in. And this really wasn't planned. We've had this podcast kind of planned. And I think I ended up putting it off. We went through our little COVID round or whatever in our household, and I had to reschedule you. And the timing on this probably couldn't be perfect. We're picking like the perfect day outside to have it behind the worst weather week we've probably ever had in the history, at least in our lifetime, of what we probably experienced here in Texas. So I love the idea of getting you in this time frame because it really gives us a focus that honestly, had we had a podcast 2 weeks ago, we probably wouldn't even be talking about the weather aspect of it and what we've just gone through and what we're still going through currently. A lot of families and a lot of parts in our community are still experiencing that. Had direct impacts through the Salvation Army having to step in and fill gaps and stuff for folks. So, but we'll talk a little bit further about that as we get going. But we did also kind of talk at getting this on tape for all us old people, getting it recorded and getting it out to the community during a time frame that we know the need is still going to be pretty dramatic based on what you guys have done in the last week to help the community. Really more so as just kind of a recharging of the surplus of stuff that you guys are needing or influx of stuff that you guys are going to need to meet a demand that's still definitely not last week's level, but still will be there, especially on like the food side and things like that. So what I want to start with, Timothy, is I want to start with your background, kind of where you grew up, what kind of brought you into the Salvation Army. I mean, I've done a lot of research and kind of talked about that before we came on camera here. But got an opportunity to kind of see that this is really your life. I mean, this is something you've really dedicated your life to, and it's not just Timothy's life; it's also your wife as well too. Y'all are both involved in it. And I'll let you talk about that here shortly. But tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you came from, and then what got you here into the Salvation Army and brought you here to the Bryan College Station area.
Well, definitely, and appreciate you having me on today.
Absolutely.
And really interesting last week. I think last week we were trying to figure out how many layers we could fit on and those things. And this week we can be out in shorts and t-shirt just about. So a lot of changes, but yeah, my wife and I, we arrived in Bryan College Station back in the end of June of 2020. So still pretty new to the area, still figuring out life in Bryan College Station. Of course, we've only experienced it in the pandemic version. So we're looking forward to, as vaccines are coming out and those things, experiencing a little bit more of it as we return to a little bit of life of what it was like before pandemic.
Pre-COVID.
Yeah. But grew up in the Salvation Army. My parents were Salvation Army officers. And in fact, I am a fourth generation Salvation Army officer. Wow. And so that's what we call in the Salvation Army, the individuals that are clergy that also serve as the executive directors in communities. We call them officers. I was born in Arlington, Virginia. Then my parents served in that Northern Virginia area, Washington, D.C. area for a few years. And then we moved to Dallas, Texas. Mm-hmm. Started school in Dallas area, then lived in Texarkana, Texas for a short time, and then returned back to Dallas and then moved out to North Carolina. And so I claim a little bit of all of the Southeast. Then lived in North Carolina, 3 or 4 different cities from the age of 10 to 24. So if you hear a little bit of that Tar Heel accent coming through, that's where that comes from. Have always kind of known the Salvation Army. I don't know how to do a Christmas without red kettles. One of my first jobs was with the Salvation Army and just kind of always grew up around that. And my parents did a really, really beneficial thing to me and my brothers is that we were always a part of the ministry. It wasn't that we were separated from it, but we were included in it. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just their ministry that we had to deal with or be there for, but we were expected to be a part of it, to be participating in it and serving in it. And so that really laid the foundation for, my desire to want to be a part of it. And the oldest of three brothers, blessed to be the oldest and the first and the best looking and all those things.
Get to stake all the claims.
Yeah,
right?
all the claims. And so, grew up in a great family, being a part of the Salvation Army, like I said, taught me a lot of things. After college, I caught on working for the Salvation Army in a ministry role, even though my degree was in accounting. I was helping out with a lot of the local church programs and the ministry outreach in Gastonia, North Carolina. I did that for about a year and then decided that it was time to get out of North Carolina, and so moved down to Jackson, Mississippi. And had a great time working there. In the midst of working there, some opportunities came up to work for other organizations, and I knew I wanted to be involved in ministry, but it was really a time of decision for me of would that be in the Salvation Army. And in that time of kind of wading through that, what really came to my heart is, serving those in need, homeless individuals, those suffering in poverty, and really making an impact in those individuals' lives. And, while other organizations do a great job with that, the thing that really occurred to me at that moment is at the Salvation Army, those individuals are literally walking in your door every day.
Yeah.
So if that's
it's your life.
Yeah.
As a part of your, it's hard to call the Salvation your job. The Salvation Army is your job. I mean, that's not how it's classified for people who take those roles on. It's like you said in the beginning, it's a calling, right? It's something that calls upon your heart to be able to serve, right? So it's more of a servantship than it is more of a leadership. Even though you have a leadership role within that deal, it is serving the community that you're a part of. And so I would imagine that makes the challenge a little bit difficult here, because you're serving from a Christ-centered focus first that is, based in Christ-centered giving, need, reaching out, filling a gap, doing all of those things that it calls for Christians to be able to do. Like we said first, and we'll talk about that a little bit, kind of how the roles for the Salvation Army here, maybe in the United States, are a little reversed compared to other places in the world. But the opportunity for you to come in and fill a role that not only serves purpose in your life, purpose in your wife's life, purpose for your family, fourth generation, it's also this idea of like, I'm going to be the generation that's going to call this quits, and we're going to go off somewhere else. So I imagine that was probably a little tough as well too, when you've got this is it expectation? I don't know. I mean, there's some of that you have to deal with if you've, I think, grown up in the Salvation Army. Yeah. At some point you have to confront it, are you going to continue in this ministry? Yeah. And that's really what that moment became for me, is and making it my own. Am I doing this just because my parents did this? I mean, I think, knowing now after being an officer for 4 years, some of the different struggles and stuff, different, hard times that we've gone through and that you've had to lead through, if it wasn't my own, I wouldn't have been able to persevere through those things. Right. And so really that was what that moment was for me, is this, okay, this is not, I'm doing this because mom and dad did this, or grandma and grandpa did this, and great grandma and grandpa did this, but I'm doing this because this is where I feel distinctly called, and this becomes distinctly mine and my calling. And so that was really what that served as a catalyst for me for. And so through that, I really decided that, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm going to be a part of. And this is still before I'd even met my wife. And so I decided to make a little bit of a change in my life because of how, even though I had a business degree and I had done some things on the ministry side of the Salvation Army, I didn't necessarily understand some of the full realm of the business side of the Salvation Army, and wanted to make sure I could do that well. And so I shifted into working in one of our headquarters, state headquarters, actually the Texas headquarters, that's out of Dallas. And I served there in their finance department, and really got an experience to see a lot of the Salvation Army and to learn a lot about the finance side of it, and really helped to prepare me. And in that, it was during that time that I met my wife.
She loves when I have to tell the story of how we met. She was actually living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time, and had 3 other roommates. And I was actually, the first time I came over to visit, it was because I was visiting one of the other roommates and was interested in one of the other roommates. And that didn't last long. And then my now wife and I began talking after that, and then dating, and then I convinced her to move out to the Dallas area. And in the Salvation Army, the calling, we serve as a husband and wife team. And so it has to be something that you both feel called to and want to be a part of. And so through that, she shared that she felt called to this. And so that was the first time I'd really ever dated someone that shared that calling. And it really opened up the relationship to even be considered to the point of marriage, because knowing that that's where I felt I was being led by God, and then sharing that calling with her really allowed me to see the relationship in a way that I'd really never been in a relationship before. Because before that, it was always, at some point, we're going to have to deal with this fact that I feel called to a ministry that if you don't feel called with, we can't really continue on, or God's got to call me away from that to something else.
Right.
And so it was a very unique situation. And then, so we got married, and we were married for about a year, and then we entered the Salvation Army Seminary in Atlanta, Georgia. The Salvation Army really will take individuals from various backgrounds and send them out to be Salvation Army officers. And that goes back to our early days of the Salvation Army. It started in 1865 in London, England. And when it came over to the U.S., a lot of times people who would come to the services, get saved at the services, 6 months later, you read in our history book where they were being sent out to then be the leader of the Salvation Army in another community.
Right.
And that's how the Salvation Army was spreading. And so we've always kept that as part of our tradition, is that you don't have to be an ordained minister. You don't have to have a 4-year degree in Bible and theology, and I'm proof of that because I've got an accounting degree. You don't have to have grown up in the movement. You can come from kind of various backgrounds, but the way we make sure nowadays that you're prepared to go out and lead the organization in a community and really be the executive director in a community is through the seminary program. And so that's a 2-year program, after which my wife and I were commissioned and ordained and appointed as the Salvation Army officers in Arlington, Texas. And so that was our first stop. And our first week there, our predecessors had set it up where every other hour we had a meeting with somebody, whether it was a community partner or a staff member. And quickly we were getting in over our heads and feeling overwhelmed by just all that was going on at this unit and all the things that now we had responsibility for. And there's a staffing issue that we had to figure out in our first week. And our predecessors used to take their preaching and planning day on Fridays, so they normally weren't in the office. And so Friday, thankfully, they hadn't scheduled any meetings. And so we went in and we were working and trying to play catch up. And that day, my wife walked into the office and said, "Oh, by the way, I think I'm pregnant." And I was like, "Oh, great. Like, we didn't need something else right now in this new adventure."
Which hour are we going to deliver in here that we're going to be free? Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh. And so sure enough, 9 months later, Eva joined us, and quite a blessing, and probably something that had we not been pregnant at that time, we probably would have put off because of settling into this new role and just how overwhelmed we felt, but ended up being really in God's timing, and was quite a blessing, and just added to our family and the joys. And by then we felt like we had a little bit more control on Salvation Army things, and then we found out how not ready to be parents we were. I think as we all go through it.
You get that first one, you start realizing that pretty fast. So, but you go with the flow, and it just kind of works, right? Number 2 always seems like, oh man, this is a piece of cake. Now that we've gone through number 1, know what to expect. And yours, so you have a 4-year-old or soon to be 4, and you've got a 1-year-old
and a 1-year-old. So a few years later, we decided that we had survived, or or forgotten all the horror stories enough to try a second one, and welcomed Hannah Joy to the family. Nice. And so I'm well outnumbered in our house now.
Another feeling.
3 girls to 1 guy, which is, I think my mother laughs at me because she was outnumbered in our family 4 to 1. So I think, for her, it's just payback that now I'm outnumbered by the girls in my family. But, really, Hannah joined us in November of 2019. And so most of her life has been in the pandemic world, but I don't think she really noticed much because that just meant she didn't go to childcare as early on.
That's right.
She spent more time with mom and dad, and so really a blessing. I think as many of us have, one of the blessings of the pandemic has been some of that family time that we've gotten, and that was a joy. And then in April of 2020, the Salvation Army called us and said, it's time for you to transfer locations. And in the Salvation Army, our officers work on an appointment system, and so we're appointed and transferred to locations as need kind of dictates. And so we got the call that we'd be coming to Bryan College Station, and so had heard a lot of great things of Bryan College Station and the work that was being done and the things that were taking place. And I had visited here before we became officers, and so we're really excited for the opportunity. I don't think we knew how much of a family-oriented community it was, though, and really felt that early on, just as the community welcomed us in. And the way I describe it is, I've been in communities that are welcoming, and they greet you and they're kind to you. But here, you're not only greeted and welcomed, but then you're invited over for dinner.
That's right.
And you're welcomed. You're made a part of the family, and that's really been a great thing. The other great experience we had as we were moving in, I'll say great experience, but the day we were moving in, we were unloading we moved in a pod. We were unloading it, and some of the young adults from the church came over to help us. And in the middle of it, I said to one of them, "Man, is it always this humid?" And they said, No. And I go, "Okay, good." What they didn't tell me is, no, normally it's more humid.
Exactly.
It was kind of actually a cool week.
Yeah.
And so
it's a different kind of hot down
here. It is, and it's got that humidity that just, man, you walk out and it hits you in the face. So. But we've adjusted and are loving it. It's an exciting time to be a part of the Salvation Army in this community. It's a great community to be a part of, and we've just really loved it from day one and are enjoying it.
Yeah, I tell friends and family, if you're raising a family, it's probably one of the best locations. It's really, I wouldn't say it's the best kept secret, but it's definitely close to it. When you talk about the tight-knitness, it's not a small community,
right,
by any stretch of means. We're not talking 3,000 people here or whatever, but it feels small. And the outreach from the community makes that happen. Like, it's the idea that when there is a need, there is a rise up in the community to meet the need. And so when you're raising a family in that, it's also the idea that everybody's looking out after everybody. It doesn't feel like an Arlington, Texas, where there's so many different subdivisions of the Dallas, DW. We'll call it the DFW.
The Metroplex.
DFW for the stretch of all of that, where it can all kind of get lost, and each community kind of becomes its own little entity. Here, it's more so, we say Bryan College Station, but we refer to it as BCS, where, I can think back to when my brother-in-law and sister-in-law were here, and we would come and visit before we ever considered coming here. There was a division line. Like, you could actually tell where Bryan stopped and where College Station started. Now you have no clue, you're going, okay, right when we get to university, that's about where the line's at, and it continues to grow, but it still continued to maintain that small town atmosphere, friendly people, probably one of the more conservative areas of Texas, but then you also have this influx in and influx out with students. So we need them. It's something that our community thrives on, to have them here as a part of A&M and a part of Blinn, but also at that same time, I tell people it's kind of like Christmas when they go home, because then you can get into places a lot quicker and eat faster and, all this other stuff. But the community has to thrive both ways. And so you come here as an appointment. Your wife comes along with you, and I really want to touch base back on that, because that's a unique deal that you're both lieutenants, right?
Yep.
And you're both coming in as a husband and wife team. into a community that, while you visited, really you're kind of on the fly, like learning about the community and the people in there, and I understand the Salvation Army as an organization, but what am I inheriting here as this appointment to come into Bryan College Station area? Where am I going to be able to rise up to meet the needs, not just of the community that I'm servicing, but also the organization that I'm now leading and heading up as well too, that I want to make sure that I'm doing the right things to represent that well, not just for the community, but for the Salvation Army in general. So we're talking about the history, and this is kind of where we'll backtrack a little bit. The Salvation Army didn't start as a organization to meet the needs of other people, and it's an extension of a church, in other words. So it really started in the religious aspect of following Jesus Christ and having this religious base where the foundation of the Salvation Army started. And its goal was to spread the word as it moved into other areas. As a part of, like most churches, it just kind of naturally became the evolution of meeting needs of people, whether that's helping to support them through food donations and things along those lines, became really the secondary part of that. The goal was to move in, and again, Salvation Army is to bring people closer to a relationship with Jesus in order to be able to save them and continue that message out as these folks went, potentially as officers and as appointments into other parts of the United States. And then,
right.
It didn't, obviously, we didn't start in the United States. Everybody assumes the Salvation Army is a United States deal. And like you said earlier, it started in England. It didn't start here. And so we were discussing before we came on air here how the Salvation Army is viewed in our culture as opposed to how it's viewed in other cultures across more than 100 countries that the Salvation Army is in. In those countries, it is first viewed as a religious organization first that provides needs for people.
Right.
Virtually like a church, right? Yep. And then we were saying here, Canada?
It's here, Canada, Australia are the ones where you kind of get the reverse, where it's really known as first a social organization, and then, you have a church that meets there as well. And even some of the beliefs about the church and things like that come out of that because of that is kind of interesting. But yeah, William Booth and his wife, Catherine, William was a Methodist minister in London, England, and really felt his calling was revival meetings, going into, at times slums or bar areas and holding revival type meetings to lead people to Christ, and eventually broke away from the Methodist Church because they wanted him to become a pastor of a congregation, and he wanted to continue to do revivals as well. Catherine felt, that she was called to preach as well. And so that wasn't really accepted in the Methodist Church at the time. And so she felt it necessary, to have a more prominent role in ministry, that kind of went along with William's feeling that they needed to break away from there. And so really started going into those poor communities in London and really going in with the gospel message to reach them with Jesus Christ and to lead them into a relationship with Jesus Christ. But what William quickly found out and noticed is, like, when people don't know where their next meal's coming from, when there's not, a roof over their head and those concerns, it really hinders them from hearing the gospel message. And so that led to the social service side of it. And I think as the Salvation Army entered into that, it began to just become more and more of the heart of the mission of, our heart breaks the more and more we realize the people that are going without, the people that are in need. And so it continued to grow in that. And I think, as you identified, the Salvation Army a lot of times spread not by organizational strategy of, we need to go there next, but a lot of times someone who was relocating to an area and said, I want the Salvation Army here. I want what I've come to love in London, in England. I want to see that here. And so both in how it spread to the U.S. and how it spread to Texas was more by someone that was coming here saying, I want to see the Salvation Army here. And that led to the spread of it. And then, I think through the ways in which our government operates, and sometimes allocating funding and stuff is what led to more of this, our social service side becoming the more prominently known side, and that people often see as, instead of it's this church that's outpouring its faith through the social services. Here in the U.S., we're almost seen as the church for the people that receive the social services,
right?
Which isn't, you'll find some of our congregations that, that is the case, that the individuals there are people that have maybe started out by coming through the social service line. But as well, now that we've been around for over 150 years, we have people that maybe 3 or 4 generations ago, they were that person coming for service, but now they're a family that's been a part of the Salvation Army for years, for decades, for generations. And so that some of them have never even necessarily experienced poverty firsthand, but they know that it was part of their family history. And so now, but they choose to continue to make the Salvation Army their home church in order to serve those, in order to continue to advance that mission through that. But yet many of those congregations would look very much similar to any congregation that you might attend. That you wouldn't necessarily walk in and be like, oh, this is a congregation full of people in poverty. You're not necessarily going to notice that. There may be people in that congregation that are experiencing poverty, but that's the same with most congregations.
Well, and it's a conundrum for you guys because in the word of establishment for them, it is, we are church first, and then we are organizationally set up here to help other people, right? But then on the flip side of that, like you were saying earlier, when these revivals went out, there was this idea of sitting there going, we have a need out here. I need this need to be met so that these people, number one, want to continue to come here and feel comfortable coming here, knowing that we can take care of them while still sharing the message of Jesus with these folks. Well, it's really that same process here as well too. Hey, while you're here, you know that we also offer church services as well too. And so that's kind of, when we're talking about it being flipped roles, that's more culturally based, I think. And so when we think, I was telling you, like, whenever there's a disaster, the first thing that people see on the front side is the Salvation Army coming to the forefront to serve in that disastrous need for the community immediately, right? And it's not bound up by regulation and all of these other things that you see from the governmental side of it, where we're going to send you FEMA, week and a half later and things like that. And by the way, we realize it's 70 degrees today here in Texas, and we sent you 1 million blankets this week, right?
Exactly.
So the Salvation Army has a direct line of sight with an immediate response mechanism, right? And that's kind of how people view it. They view the idea of the Salvation Army is going to come in and help people in need. And so, which is fine. And I'm sure the Salvation Army is very willing to wear that badge and wear it proudly, knowing that where there's a need, we can be there to meet that need. But also at that same point, not wanting to give up on the true mission of where the Salvation Army is rooted in, which is still to come, meet a need, and bring them into that relationship that they're still looking for. I mean, it's changed over the years, obviously, and it's not that old of an organization. When you think about 150 years, that's not a long time for an organization with the structure and the capacity. I mean, think about the idea of, just take a church as an example. If you gave a church 150 years, could they meet the needs that the Salvation Army currently meets in over 100 countries worldwide? Probably not. And so structure has to become a place where there are officers put in place and missions put in place to go, listen, this is where we're going to grow into. Here's where we see a need that needs to be met, this country, this part of the United States, this whatever, to be able to grow the group. When he leaves the Methodist Church in England, he leaves the Methodist Church because there was a crossroads that came, and it was a decision to be made at that point. And so there's not an agreement with how this needs to go down. And basically he then turns around and says, I'm going to go and take this on the road and do it myself. I've got plenty of people that I can take along with me, and we'll grow this thing on the outside of that. And they make their decision to part ways, but it's not the idea of parting ways and I'm going to go and not practice, bringing people into a relationship with Jesus. I'm going to go and do this as a part of that. And I think a lot of churches meet that need now, but a church has not looked at it on the opposite role of what we were discussing. A church is a religious organization first that practices and preaches, bringing people into that faith. And then on the backside of that, it is an entity that can help people in the community, where, like we were discussing, that role reversal for the Salvation Army, I think that's really lost in that the idea that salvation to bring people into that growing relationship is still the critical point. It is still the major responsibility for the organization first. And officers see that, people who are in the organization see that, but culturally we've flipped that on its head. Yeah. And so we've said, well, man, if you need something, just go to the Salvation Army. We don't say, that there's religious offerings to be able to be done as well too, where you can go down there and hear somebody preaching the gospel and sitting in church on Sundays. And like we were talking about in here, we were discussing how much is on your plate of what you actually deal with, right? Because we were also talking about the idea when it's husband and wife, you guys never turn it off, right? I mean, it's one of those deals. I mean, my wife and I both worked at Walmart at the same time, and you go home and it's really not like, hey, what, like you were saying, what happened at work today? What happened at work today. You were right there with me, and so there's not this turn off mechanism. It's 24/7, and so the idea also of being able to create a partnership, not just through marriage, but also a partnership in that you've been appointed to a role here that you have a responsibility to, is a big deal. I mean, it's and always having to be on is a tough location to be, especially for, you were talking about pastors in churches and things like that, where even when it's not truly a partnership, like maybe the wife doesn't preach in that church or whatever, it's still a partnership. Yep. It's still the idea, like, look, I got to support my husband over here who's a part of the church, and I'm the pastor's wife, or whatever that looks like. And their mission is still the same, though. The goal is still the same. And I'm sure for you and your wife, the goal is also still the same. But it's met with, we want to bring people into these relationships with Christ is our number one goal as far as what we do, but our culturally expectation for us is that we represent the Salvation Army well and that we lead it well in this community also. So that's a tough place to be between those two. And then how do you allocate your time to creating a service and creating a sermon, whereas most pastors get all week to build that sermon up to that Sunday deal, and you're spending most of your week right in the middle of donations and meeting people's needs. And like you said, on Friday, we're going to sit down and we're going to get that sermon done for Sunday so that we can make sure the people who show up for church on Sunday also have their needs met, because that's our priority as well. Yeah,
and I think for, one of the things I've had to adopt in working with the Salvation Army and being a minister within the Salvation Army is that to truly be a part of the Salvation Army, I have to embrace the whole mission of the Salvation Army.
Right.
And the mission of the Salvation Army is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and meet human needs in his name without discrimination. And so in that, I can't say, well, I'm just a preacher of the gospel, and so I sit over here.
Right.
Or I can't just say, well, I just handle the meet human needs. And, I don't kind of dabble into the other parts as well. If I start seeing my ministry as just one half of the equation, or trying to make sure the equation is balanced, then I think that leads to a lot of frustration. I have to see it as a full expression of that mission. And so in some ways, my preaching isn't just on Sunday morning for the 20 or 30 minutes that I'm up there in front of the congregation, but it's also,
it's every interaction.
Yeah, it's every interaction. Yeah. It's I'm preaching when I'm helping to meet a need. I'm preaching when I'm interacting with a staff member, and the way in which I do that. And so it all becomes ministry. One of the great things here in this community is the Salvation Army is very visible. A lot of, we get a lot of coverage on news stations and things like that. And people recognize my wife and I, whether we're in the Salvation Army uniform or not.
Right.
And so, I have to be careful even when I'm driving down the road, because, someone might recognize me as the Salvation Army if I start honking at them or,
That's right.
or
Why
things
are you
like
going
that.
so slow?
But I mean, even that in some form becomes a part of the ministry, like showing grace and mercy in those times, it all becomes a part of it. And I think, what does it mean to be a part of the Salvation Army as your church? It means that that's what you're striving to do, is that it's that I'm not just coming here for Sunday morning worship, but I'm also a part of the meeting the needs. And, it's always tricky. We want to make sure people don't think that that's how they earn salvation, is through those acts. But we do believe that our faith and our salvation compels us to act.
Yeah.
And compels us into action. And so that's a necessity of kind of what it means to be a part of the Salvation Army. Now, thankfully, my wife and I do act as a team. And so it does help with some of those traditional Sunday morning responsibilities, because we split those responsibilities between ourselves. We rotate every other week who preaches and things like that. And so that helps, because now, because I don't have as much time just set aside strictly to preparing a sermon, now I can take 2 weeks to kind of prepare for that, instead of every week having to kind of prepare for that. And so that kind of helps in still giving me probably as much preparation time as a lot of other individuals. Yeah. But it's because I'm spreading it out over 2 weeks instead of in 1 week's time.
Where a team-based deal works really well for you. Plus, you're both in the same location all the time. So it can also be thinking about, this particular message, and what's your thoughts? Let me bounce this off of you. So you probably also become each other's idea generators, message generators. Can you proof this for me a little bit?
Checker.
I mean, and so that's really kind of the one thing that I thought was interesting is, and I kind of pleaded ignorance as well too, is that cultural base, that cultural vision. Well, let me back that up. That cultural lens that the Salvation Army is looked at through a community is the needs first, the ministry. Yeah. I wouldn't even say second, because I don't think ministry, prior to us sitting down here and me doing research on this, I don't think Salvation Army in the ministry category, right? I think of it as a rise up to meet the needs of the community and the people in that community. But then when you pull it all back in and you really do the research on it, you have conversation about it. Part of the reason why I love having these types of podcasts to get information out to folks is to understand, listen, we're almost, I want to be cautious about the word that I use. We're church first, because church really is wherever Christ is at. I mean, it doesn't have to be, hey man, make sure you put the cross on the outside to classify it as a church, and we need to have our classifications, and all that other kind of stuff. Church is where Jesus shows up at and where his people show up at to minister. So church is individual interactions with meeting a need with someone. Also getting people to understand that you're not a sum total of your current situation, right? That everybody will go through the challenges, the ups and downs in life and all of this stuff. But the one thing that I always find interesting when I talk to friends that are in need of word is the idea of like, listen, man, we're not here to tell you that you have a debt that you need to pay up to be a good Christian. I mean, that debt's already been paid for you and was paid a long time ago. You're the recipient of a debt that was paid for you. And in this word, what we want to do is we want to use this as a mission to maybe meet your needs at this point, so that later on, when you're in a better situation, you can help give back as a part of meeting needs for other people. That's where most people see the Salvation Army. And so when they're running through and they see the kettlebells going on and they see the fundraisers going on, they get that feel good, let me drop $1 in there, let me drop a 10 or drop a 20, and I've done my part, And while that's important for the Salvation Army as a total, the idea of creating people who come through the Salvation Army, who are met in a time of need, that potentially they go out into the community to be an extension of the Salvation Army in the community without necessarily wearing a tag or anything. But it's just like anything else. People who go to a church can say, my church took care of me right here. There's not much of a difference in that particular situation. You're taking care of people in a time of need, not based around any kind of structural, well, you got to meet this. It's We want you to be here with us, and the goal is if we can meet your need to make things easier, then maybe you spend church with us on Sunday. Right. Maybe you come to church first because there's no other place that you feel you have left, and realize that there are all these other resources that are in place and services that we can hook you and plug you into to make this temporary situation that you're in become a permanent solution to something long-term for you and building a good foundation for your future. I mean, there are a lot of folks that can, they can go back and say, hey, listen, I was homeless and now I'm a success and I have a home and I have a family and everything else. But that particular story becomes a structural foundation underneath all the stuff they built on top of. Started in by probably an individual. That could be just an individual in the Salvation Army that they have the contact with. And we were talking about you have 7 folks that work for you, I guess, in the structure?
We have 7 staff members.
Right. So those people, it's also trying to get, you're leading this group of folks to get them to understand you're an extension, not of the Salvation Army, you're an extension of Jesus Christ.
Right.
And so every interaction that you have, keep that in mind when you go through this process, that we want people to see Jesus in the interaction. We don't, that's great. Sue's over here taking care of somebody else. We don't want them to see Sue. We want them to see Jesus.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, there's so many negative connotations with Christians, with the church and all those things, that sometimes when our first interaction can be in a meeting a need and helping in that way, it kind of helps to break down that barrier.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, there's this sense of I'm going to be judged. I'm going to be, nobody's, they're all going to look at me in a way. And sometimes that's because that's been how we've acted.
Yeah, listen, man, we talked before we went on air, the most judgmental people that if you go and you ask people on a poll who the most judgmental people are in the United States, they're going to tell you it's Christians.
Yeah. And so I think sometimes getting an experience where your first experience isn't someone judging and it's someone just helping to meet your need, whatever your situation is, it helps to break down that. And
Absolutely.
It helps, and it's not inside the 4 walls that I don't know how do I act in church? How am I supposed to sit or stand? Yeah. There's a lot of those unspoken cultural things in church.
I'm not good enough to be here.
Right.
I've done really bad things.
Yeah.
I'm not deserving of Jesus's love. All of that stuff that comes into somebody's thought process. So to that point, it probably, I'm gonna really two-face this deal here out for you. It probably helps the idea that culturally we flip that somebody can come in on needs-based first to then extend that offer out, as opposed to, we're a religious-based organization that brings everybody into a close relationship with Jesus Christ first, and then we meet your needs. That may be fearful to some people of the idea of going, listen, man, some of the churches I've been to in town, man, those people call themselves Christians in there, and they're following Jesus' word. I'm not so sure there are people there that do that. Just because they've had a bad interaction with the few, and the many suffer at the cause of that, and so that's the same deal. You can have one individual who has a bad day, bad day at the office, and then unfortunately that gets passed along to one individual who's there to get the needs met, and now all of a sudden it's not, Sue had a bad day. It's, the Salvation Army treated me this way, so that's the unfortunate side of it. But if you can meet the needs first, then the idea becomes open more. That door almost opens for you, the idea of going, let me tell you why the needs were met. The needs weren't met because, the community gave all this stuff, which is true, but God put it on people's hearts to give that back in. Let's give due where due is needed. Due is needed that Jesus will always rise up to meet people's needs. Right? Yeah. People who have been shunned away from the church, or people who have gone to church and had a bad experience, or, it just hasn't been the message that's sat well with them or whatever, have a hard time connecting those two. And it's hard to be in the leadership role to bring an organization together that you want to require it to meet those two. You really want those two to interconnect with each other, where people have a good positive outlook on, okay, well, I can go here and get this need met without somebody looking at me sideways and going, well, you look like you're capable to get a job. Why don't you just go get a job? Yeah. Which is, unfortunately, culturally, we create that little segment of our United States as well, too, who just say, listen, I don't want to get political on anything, but the bootstraps and all the other stuff that kind of go along with that, is sometimes the first knee-jerk reaction from people, instead of, How about we just meet the needs first and then focus on the services that we can provide to help? And services to help, looks different for every individual. It may be a person who already has a job, it may be a person who already brings in a paycheck, but it may be a person who's, alcohol dependent. It may be PTSD. It may be all of these things that are battling against that person being able to keep and retain a solid employment that will lead them to be able to be good givers in the community somewhere down the road, that they have their own battles and their own internal battles that they fight. So let's move to services, because I think this is really probably where we'll spend the most time today in talking about what the Salvation Army provides. So again, I'm going to plead ignorance and stupidity here from not doing enough research. I mean, like I said earlier, man, I'm the guy that I put it in the kettle and you make the donations and everything else, but not realizing the extent to where those donations are pushed out to. And so I printed off a list of stuff, and I'll just kind of run through these. So we talked about Help Rescue Christmas, which most people can associate that to the Angel Tree program, and we'll come back to that one. LGBTQ Support, which again, man, that was one when I was pulling this up. I'm like, wait, let me click on this, because I'm curious how this meets in. And the idea, again, some people out there Christian based and everything else who are at their churches and thinking about that and the word support underneath that. This is, again, where you start meeting the rubber meeting the road. Do you really practice what Jesus is telling you, right? Do you really see that as we're all equal? We all have a need for Jesus. It's not the idea of going, hey, man, if you choose to be a lesbian, choose, right? Nice word. If you choose to be a lesbian or you choose to be gay or whatever, then there's no place for you in this church. There's no place for you with Jesus. There's no place for you here. And when you create an atmosphere that listen, man, I'm not put here to be your judge, jury, and executioner. Although I think there are Christians out there who can easily pick up a Bible and say, here's my judge, jury, and executioner all right here in one. And again, people who tend to get pushed away from the church. And that category and that group of individuals that fit into that category can probably tell you story after story after story of how they're judged in that particular role. So you create this environment, again, where, listen, we don't care if you got two heads and a tail growing off your backside here. We want you in. We want you here to hear the message. And we want you here to hear the message because the message is important for everybody. Because that debt wasn't paid for everybody that's straight. That debt wasn't paid for everybody who only meets these little criterias and categories. That debt was paid for everyone and everyone's future down that road. So you bring those people into that mix, and I'm sitting there going, God, and that was a poor choice. I don't want to say those people because that sounds terrible in the context. But you bring that category in, and now all of a sudden you start splitting the basis need of what the church believes versus what the Bible says. And, if we all live our lives the way the Bible says, then we never have to worry about what the judge is, because we're not put here for that, nor are we in the category line to be in line to be anywhere in that role to make that decision. So I thought that was interesting to see that up on the category line of the stuff that was in there, and a powerful message to go, listen, man, we're not in this to be hip. We're in this because this is what we should be telling everybody. This is the message we should be sending everybody. We don't care what sex, creed, religion, race, whatever you are, just come to us. We're going to welcome you at the doors no matter what, right? And are we going to sit here and say, well, we're here to meet the needs and bring people into Jesus, but only the people that fit these categories, only the people that check these boxes. So I found that valuable to see that on the website, and not something that you'll typically see on a church website by any stretch of the means. But again, something that's valuable. You want people to be there. Disaster relief goes without speaking. We're talking about anytime there's a disaster, the expectation really from the community is that the Salvation Army is at the front lines of that they're there to meet the needs quickly. They can circumvent everything. They don't have to go through the governmental programs to get a trailer, to get something into a location, to get water there, food, locations for people to stay, all of that support is all met within that deal at the front lines, and the Salvation Army is almost always at the front of that cause. Homeless shelters, food pantries, grassroots service, life skills to escape poverty. And we'll talk about that a little bit further. I think we used it as, I wrote it down while we were talking in the beginning, generational poverty, I think was something. So we'll come back to that. Alcohol and drug rehab, spiritual healing, job training, summer camps, solution to human trafficking. And again, that's something that's on the rise.
Yeah.
And something, again, that it's the ugly that nobody wants to talk about, and it's the scary for people who have kids, youth kids. I mean, this is a fearful conversation even for me to think about, especially in my community. Veteran services, services for aging individuals, help with domestic abuse, after-school programs. Now, that's not all-inclusive, obviously, but that's kind of, when you go to Salvation Army's page, those are the things that pop up on there. And I can sit there and tell you that in me going through the research and going to that page, there are maybe 3 of those things that I was like, oh, yeah, well, I knew they did that. But, I mean, I just rattled off. Those are 12 categories that I just rattled off that aren't all-inclusive to it. Because the reality is you guys also come into the community and partner through a lot of those.
Right.
And that's kind of before we came on air, it was the Salvation Army can't be everything to everyone.
Right.
Right. But the Salvation Army can come in and be the bridge to organizations locally, like you were saying earlier, that do it better, have much more established programs, better resources in some cases. Now, that's probably in areas like this. Now, when we get to Houston, some of the metro areas you talk about, you said the resources tend to expand a little bit more, and there are a lot more that the Salvation Army can offer in those category lines that are direct through the Salvation Army. But in some of the smaller communities or whatever, they have to rely on the partnerships, and it's not a one-up. It's not a, man, we raised more money than you raised, or we took care of more people than you took care of. We're talking about that partnership. So if you would, a little bit, kind of speak on that partnership that you've noticed here within the Bryan College Station area and how that comes to benefit everybody that shows up at the Salvation Army, where you guys can get them plugged in.
Yeah, and I think, it's important. It's not just us bridging people to other services, but individuals bridge to us as well.
Yeah, backwards.
And so, I mean, in this community, especially, what my wife and I's experience has been is that this is a community that the nonprofits aren't trying to compete with each other. They're not trying to, put us out of business or things like that.
One up.
But it's a realization that, man, look at the issues that individuals in our community are facing. If we're truly going to make an impact in these, we've got to work together. We've got to be coordinating with each other. We've got to be, strategic about how we serve and assist individuals. And so, we have the services that we can provide, directly or through maybe a regional Salvation Army, but then there's things that locally other individuals, quite frankly, do better than us.
Yeah.
And we can connect them with that. And it's not done in a spirit of, well, we do this better than you, but it's done in I want to get this person the best help I can get them.
Right.
And so in order to do that, I connect them with this agency or these individuals, because they do this the best. They're focused on this, and they can get these individuals the assistance that they need. And so it's really, really critical, especially as we try to truly address the issues and not just put a Band-Aid on an issue, because, many a times the services that maybe we're providing assistance with are, it's, rent and utility assistance. It's not that's the only need the family has. Normally there's a deeper need, and it's how do we address that? How do we get them what they need to overcome that, and be able to become self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And so that really comes through partnering with other agencies and connecting people with the resources they have. As well, we don't hold all the resources. So even in the areas where we do provide service, sometimes, our funds may be limited that month or have run out that month, and we can connect somebody with another agency so that they can still get the assistance that they need. And so those things are crucial to how we serve individuals. And again, because we don't want someone to come to us and say that they have this need, but you know what, that's not on our menu of services. Yeah. Sorry, too bad, have a nice day. No, we want to be able to address that and get them the help they need. And so really a no wrong door approach.
Yeah.
Okay, you might have come to us for something we don't do in our building, but we're going to try to get you connected with the person that does do that service so that you have that need met. And I think that's crucial. And need doesn't discriminate. Everyone experiences need, however you identify, or, whether that's racially, whether that's economically, we all experience, need, and many of us have those needs, and a lot of people come to us. And so, we want to make sure we're not discriminating in how we serve, and that we assist anyone that comes to us with need and help meet them with need. And they don't ever have to step foot in the Salvation Army for a spiritual meeting.
Right.
There's not even that expectation. We do it out of an outpouring of our love, and an outpouring of the love that we receive from Jesus Christ. But that doesn't mean you even have to say you're going to accept that love, to receive
we'll give
our
you this
service,
if you show up in church or something.
There's none of that prerequisite, and that's the important thing. And I think, that helps to remove some of that judgmental type feeling that people get sometimes when they receive services. That we're not getting into your spiritual preference or things like that, but we're just, what is your need? How can we meet that need and serve you today? Yeah. And I think that really, opens people up to that, and it plants a seed. Sometimes I never have to say the word Jesus Christ in order to show someone Jesus Christ. It plants a seed of, man, that person did something that was selfless. They gave of themselves in order to help me, and that speaks volumes, and often leads people to ask the question, why would you do that? Why would you, do something that's contrary to what culture would tell us you should do, or the way you should act? Yeah.
The bootstraps and all the other stuff. I mean, it's real. People are very quick to go, this person's able-bodied, right? They should be able to work. They should be able to do these things to provide. I did it. Why can't you do it? I mean, it's this constant back and forth cultural judgment, personal judgment, things that kind of happen within there. I view the nonprofits in Bryan College Station almost like safety nets that are all piled up underneath each other, right? I may miss this one. This one might not have what I need, and I fall through that, but I go to the next one. And then you think about all of those, Twin City Missions, BV Casa, Scotty's House, all of those things that are in play. And I've left a ton of them out, I know, but I'm just kind of hitting on some of the ones that just came to mind. So if I didn't mention you, don't get offended. But those all sitting in there catch somebody through the fall, catch somebody through the need. If they fall into Salvation Army's net, like you said, I don't have the best resources. I want to get you the best resources, but I know someone at this organization that's better equipped to be able to handle it. It's not a pawn off. It's the idea of, am I doing you service by getting you the fourth best? Or am I doing you service by hooking you into somebody that handles this stuff all the time and has better resources and better equipped to be able to handle the root? Because again, what we were talking about in here is rent, utilities, needing something, a bill paid, and that kind of stuff. That's all a symptom. That's a temporary situation to a symptom. And so we're referring to it as cold and symptom, right? You get a cold, you have symptoms from the cold. So the cold is what needs to initially be addressed. It's the thing that needs to be challenged and fixed. The symptoms are the things that come off of that as a part of that. So now all of a sudden, if I've got somebody who, and I guess we can kind of flip into that generational, that generational poverty that we're talking about, where I've not seen it. I've not been raised through that to know that this is what I need to do to better myself out of this. I just repeat the cycle over and over and over that I'm a part of just by visually seeing it and growing up in it. And those generational poverties look a lot different for different people, whether that's government assistance programs that just carry over from generation to generation to generation. And we tend to look at that sometimes as a community of people scamming the system. And there are people that do that. There are people that know how to work that to get the most for their, most bang for their buck, I guess. And then there are those folks that those things are actually in place to catch people as a part of the safety net, And so what you're looking at in that deal is the cold becomes, maybe cold for this person is job training and getting them plugged into an employer that's looking to hire and getting stable work for this person so that they can pay rent, pay utilities, pay the bills that they're coming to us asking for assistance on. Listen, 2020 for most people probably looks a lot different than 2019 for people who had stable incomes, stable jobs. Those folks could be working for a place that business closed shop in 2020. Now I'm just out of a job. Maybe that's where I worked for 15 years or what I know how to do best. And I can't find that service anywhere else that I can go and get plugged back into, because nobody's leaving jobs because it's critical to have one here when I'm running through this. But if I can come to the Salvation Army, and the Salvation Army has their hooks into different locations, organizations that can help with job training, job placement, working through individuals in town who constantly checking back in with the Salvation Army to say, hey, I've got a need here. If you have somebody come across that has these type of skill sets, send them to me. Right? Or they go through a job training program where on the backside of that through the Salvation Army, then they also have this opportunity to get on with some of these companies by going through these job trainings, or even training up, whereas their skill set was here, but they have an opportunity to raise those skill sets so that they can align themselves with better career opportunities for the long term. Solve the cold, fix the symptoms, right? And not everybody's there. Not everybody's in that particular situation, because generational poverty means, oh man, did you fix that cold? It's time for me to go find somebody else that's infected and get a cold again, because it's time. You know, they don't ever look past that. They just think, I've had a cold my whole life. This is how this is supposed to work.
Right. And I think, how we identify it is individuals have barriers that keep them from self-sufficiency. And so many of the people that we interact with, we kind of identify individuals in 4 stages towards self-sufficiency, with the 4th stage being someone who has reached self-sufficiency. Normally where we interact is at the 1st stage, which is crisis. You know, I'm about to get my lights shut off. I'm about to get kicked out of my house. I don't have food to feed my family. That's normally where we're meeting people, is in that crisis phase. And so normally that first bit of assistance that gets them out of crisis, but it still leaves them in a vulnerable stage where they're, you know, if I don't get income, I'm going to be right back here next month, or I'm going to be,
see you in 30 days.
Or, you know, I'm going to, you know, it's just going to be in this vicious cycle of vulnerability and crisis. And so a lot of times our services have been, okay, we got you out of crisis. That's kind of like the push out of the bird's nest. And we hope you keep flying forward and get to self-sufficiency.
Right.
And now, I mean, us as well as a lot of nonprofits are becoming a much more strategic and saying, okay, what are the things that keep you in that vulnerable state? What is it? Is it job? Is it car? Is it medical? Is it, life skills? What has kind of, for lack of a better term, held you captive in that area and keeps you from pressing on to that, what we call increased stability, which is that 3rd stage. And so what is it there? And it's beginning to identify those things. And, like you said, many of those things that we're identifying that keep you there, it's not, not being able to pay rent is, a byproduct of living below the poverty line. That's really the issue. And okay, how do we address that issue? What resources do we need to bring around this family to address that issue so that we can get them beyond that, so that, this family lives in self-sufficiency. And now what's happening is that the children are seeing life lived in self-sufficiency and not a life lived dependent upon all these services and things. And I think that's key to breaking the cycle of generational poverty, because right now, what kids are seeing is this is how you make it. This is how you get through this. And, don't really, you can't, there's so many barriers and obstacles, you're better off just learning to live within this cycle of vulnerability and crisis than trying to press forward. And because that'll just, you don't really have the hope that you can break through those barriers. Yeah. And so that's a key thing that we see taking place. And then so it's okay, how do we get families through that?
Well, and somebody who's lived in the crisis, who's generationally grown up by, and I'll step even one further to say trained within the family that this is how you get. and not how you get through job, hard work, career, things like that. This is how you get through programs, right? This is how we funded ourselves, where I either didn't have to work or whatever. When that dollar amount exceeds the amount that they can go to work and make for hard work, sweat equity, everything else, job training, everything that puts them in alignment, it's a discouragement to that person as well too, to go, okay, well, I've got to give up this to go do this. If I go and work here, I lose this X dollar amount. And we end up in a, I mean, let's step back a little bit. We won't call it unemployment or anything else, but let's step into 2020, where people were met with disaster relief unemployment, meaning that their job, laid them off, or they were furloughed or whatever, and then they were able to apply to get assistance through the government in order to be able to do that. Listen, some people made more money on that program than they were making at their job. So then when it came time for them to go back to work, now it became this deal like, I've been out for 4 months and I'm making double what I was making at the job that I was at. But then we're going to tell them, hey, come back to work, and it's time to come off of this program and go back on. Well, I kind of like it over here. This is nice, and employers then have to make decisions. And while that's great that there's something there to prop people up, it's not to support people for their life. And unfortunately, generational poverty sometimes creates that individual, family, cultural based, whatever that is, that treats that as the support for life, as opposed to the temporary for now, so that we can get you in alignment with something else. And again, a lot of people, man, their solution to generational poverty is a meme on a social media. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps, whatever that looks like. I worked hard. You should work hard. You're perfectly capable. Why can't you? It's obviously more complex and more complicated than that. But it is also teaching folks that who you surround yourself with becomes who you're going to be. If generational poverty is what you surround yourself with, and that's your core mechanism of support, then why would we expect that there's going to be a change of something happen, when that's all they see around them? But if I want to be a millionaire, I don't go and surround myself with a bunch of people making minimum wage jobs. I go and surround myself with successful people who can teach and train and bring me up. But it also works the same way as well. If I'm successful and I surround myself with people who are not successful and don't have any drive, and those are my key core 5 people in my life, then that's probably going to have the opposite. It's almost like popping a parachute out of a car. It's going to have a drag on there that's going to pull at you the whole time. So job training, skills, life skills, things like that you can partner up and pair people, is getting them the opportunity to see there's more to this than what you just visually see in front of you. But you don't see anything else that's success-wise outside of that, because that's the barrier that you're talking about. The barrier there that this is how I was taught. If I send somebody to school and I teach them with the best teacher that's possible in math, they're probably, if that's their student, they're probably going to become really good at math. But if I give them the worst teacher in math, how am I going to expect them to keep up with the one who's teaching over here at a high level and that's turning out students that understand and get it? And so those mentors, I'd imagine that's kind of another thing that kind of falls in line here with Salvation Army, is getting mentors in place for these folks as well too, who can even be a been there, done that, solution to them. Listen, I was where you were, and let me tell you what helped me get past this. The job training opportunities. Most people, I don't have a luxury or an opportunity to go to college. And so culturally we'll say, man, you don't go to college, you're going to flip burgers all your life. Instead of, there are many jobs and skill sets that are out there that can be learned through working with a company to move yourself up in there and to be able to be something outside of what you even envisioned when you started. I use Walmart as my example for that. When I started with them, I was 19 years old and I was pushing baskets. If you'd have told me then that I would grow through the company and run my own store one day, I told you you're crazy. And all I wanted at that point was I needed a job to pay my bills. And that was it. And so I can relate to that. I understand, like, I need to be right here because this is what I've got to do right now. This is what I got to make, instead of what can I make and teaching people as well. This is why the knock is on public schools about teaching finance in public schools, real life skill sets that people need to leave school with, right? What happens with most people when they make more money? They go and spend more money. I always tell people, as income rises, lifestyle usually follows right behind that. And where poverty happens in somebody's life or crisis is when lifestyle exceeds money. I no longer can support the lifestyle because I'm here and lifestyle's risen above that. And you really don't want to create people who follow the line with just a little gap in there where any little hiccup is a major catastrophe. I closed down for a week because of the ice, and I don't get paid for a week.
Yeah, well, and that's the world we live in today. Is
60%,
a very thin margin because we live in a finance world. Finance it all.
Yep.
You can finance your Amazon purchases. You don't have to pay for that all right now.
Let's knock that down into 3 easy payments.
So what we have is in today's day and age, we have more people living paycheck to paycheck. But that phrase is different than what we used to think of paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
We used to think of paycheck to paycheck. You're living like that to cover your bare necessities. But now we have people living a very nice, comfortable lifestyle paycheck to paycheck because they financed it all.
Yeah.
And so as soon as, you shut down for a week because of an ice storm or a pandemic hits, we
got somebody in your line at the Salvation Army.
Right. And the thing is, all the, this year, especially with the pandemic, a lot of the things that we felt like if everybody did these things, there's that group, well, if you have a 6-month emergency fund and you do these things and you've done all these things, then financial crisis will never come to you.
Right.
All that's been washed away because, we've got people that had the 6-month fund
1 year
that went through it.
Yeah.
And even if they got work to manage the house payment and those things, there was this gap.
Yeah.
And so they've you had people that immediately went out and got another job, somehow found one, even though it was paying less.
Yeah.
They hopped in there as a bag boy at Kroger or at Walmart because those stores needed more people at that point. So you had people that did that, but yet still it wasn't adding up. And so you still had people experiencing need. And I think that's something that this year has maybe helped a lot with, because there's times we have these perspectives of what someone in poverty is. And it's someone that doesn't want to try or someone that's not, but a lot of times it's someone that's just, they've lost hope.
Yeah.
Because what they've seen or what they've had model for them is, someone tries to get out of this cycle, but yet look at all the pain and the heartache, hard work that they have to go through, and they don't really get that much better of a lifestyle. Why would I go through that just so I can say I'm self-sufficient? That's some of what's perceived. And so there's not a hope for a brighter future through this. And so a lot of times that's what keeps someone in this cycle. It's not that they don't desire a better lifestyle. They don't desire to be off of government assistance and those things. It's that there's not really hope that it's going to get better by doing that.
Yeah.
That they're going to actually get a better lifestyle. And so that's some of what we see individuals that kind of get trapped in this cycle of poverty and homelessness, that's it. And I don't think any kid comes out saying, well, I'm just going to live in this kind of lifestyle the rest of my life. But a lot of times, it just obstacles come in their way, challenges come in their way early on. They hit, when I hit 14, 15, 16, I wasn't expected to go get a job. I was able to, to focus on school and finish school and to focus on the sport that I love that got me a scholarship into college, because of the family status I was in.
Sure.
Instead of someone who, you're of employment age, we need a third income in this household just to put groceries in. And so it does have an impact and leads into that cycle of poverty. And I think we all experienced as teens, as young adults, when we first started getting that first paycheck, we thought we were millionaires. I got paid what? I can buy this, and this.
Yeah.
And, I do think that's some of where and that's where you see that generational effect come in, because when I had those inclinations to blow a whole paycheck, I had a parent there that sat me down and said, this is the impact of what you've done.
Yeah.
But when you've got a parent that instead is thankful that you're spending a little extra money, meant we got to have a nice treat with dinner or something, and doesn't really teach savings because they've never been able to save and things like that. I mean, that's the impact of what leads into generational poverty.
Yeah.
And so it's having to teach those lessons. And sometimes, it's decisions that are made because they feel forced into a decision. And so it ends up being a bad decision. And I right in my mind as I'm saying that, I think of cars. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a family that's just gotten a horrible deal on a car, not because the person price gouged them or something, but because they just bought what they could afford at the time. But then it ends up being a car that takes so much repair and things like that. And then, this family ends up, maybe they took car payments and the car ends up breaking down, is basically unusable. And, they have to make a decision. Do I continue making payments on a car I can't use?
Yeah.
Or do I go and get a new car, but now I'm going to kill all my credit? And I mean, these are the things that lead into a cycle of generational poverty. And,
you're talking about cars. I went and bought one last year, and when I sat down, usually the finance side, now granted, I've been blessed that I can usually pay cash for a car or whatever, but I'm sitting down, and I usually still go through the finance part of it with them just to see what they have to offer. And the guy in the finance department goes, "What do you want to do?" And I'm thinking, the last time I purchased a car through finance, it was like a 36-month loan, a 48-month loan. It was kind of pretty much it. Now all of a sudden I'm over there and the guy's like, "Well, we got everything up to 96 months. And I'm like, 96 months? That's 8 years.
Yeah.
Like, is this a house? Like, are we financing a house here? Like, but again, I can pay this amount in this amount of time, or I can pay this amount in this amount of time. And you get people tied in. I mean, financing things. And like you said, the easier that's made for folks. I mean, because there's always someone, right? Listen, I can always, worst case scenario, man, my credit's horrible. Now all of a sudden I can go down to the guy that's going to charge me 60% interest on a quick 2-week loan, and I'm going to turn around and pay it. Or I can go down there, and that car, by the way, that I paid off and everything else, let me take that title down with me and I'll sign it off over here so that I can get $1,500 on a loan. And I've got X number of, weeks or months or whatever to get that paid back with X percent. And again, these are all things that when we send people into the world out of I'm going to be real careful here. We don't prepare people. I won't say we send people. We don't prepare people when they leave out of the education system to really know what the real world looks like when it comes to payments and what it costs to do everything. And then you get these kids that are out there and they finish college, they've got a degree, they've spent $80,000 on the degree, and they think, well, hey man, where's my first $100,000 a year job? I'm entitled to it. I just spent 80 grand. Now where's the money? And now they have this payment that's saddled them here. They now go in and realize, I'm not going to make the money that I initially thought I was going to make. I'm going to make a third of that. And I've got these loans and everything else that I'm paying in. They now come off their parents' insurance, and now you're sitting with your own insurance payment. Man, things look a lot different. I didn't realize all this. You had to pay all these things to live and be self-sufficient, as to say it, right? And so it's the idea of preparing people, so when you talk about job training, skills, skill training, maybe even is a better use of that word. It's about plugging people in to, again, break a generational gap. I mean, I was raised by a single mom, never saved a dime.
Yeah.
Really, because she couldn't save a dime.
Right.
I mean, every dime went to something. And that dime created, not being able to see that. And then realizing when I got to of age to go to work, I had a choice. I could play basketball, maybe get a scholarship and go to college, or I'm going to go to work. And this is going to guarantee that we keep a roof over our head, gas in the car, insurance, everything that we needed to live. And that's how that looked. I also came from that single mom who divorced when I was 2 years old. And again, I have a choice here that I can continue that generational cycle of divorce and all that kind of stuff. But yet here this next month, my wife and I are going to celebrate 25 years of being married.
That's amazing.
But again, it's breaking the cycle. And it's not that you also have to teach people they're not what their history is or where they came from. That's really difficult to unhook people from, because it is the idea that I can justify being this way because this is how I came. I could justify the fact that I would be a womanizer and run around and marry and divorce because that's where I came from and that's who my dad was in that particular situation. I can justify that. It's in my DNA, whatever, right? Or I can say, I'm not going to let that dictate who I'm going to be in the future. But I've got to put people in front of me. I had good role models in roles of people who didn't even know that they were a role model for me. I tell people that the way that I learned to love my wife is through my mom's aunt and uncle, who were married almost 60 years.
Yeah.
They never knew that I'm over there looking at them as my role model for what a good marriage looked like, but that's what I carried on from there. And on my mom's aunt's, it was really my aunt, my great aunt, on her deathbed was where she learned that. Where I said, I've got to tell you this.
Yeah.
You need to know this. My marriage is successful because of your marriage.
Yeah.
Paying that back just with those words. And not once did she sit there and think, man, I'm going to make sure this kid knows how to love a woman right and knows what a good marriage looks like. But paying that back to them as an homage for, listen, your life stretched in ways you never even knew. And while you guys were over here at 50 years of marriage, both holding hands and your arms around each other and loving on each other and everything else, I was watching. So it is the idea that you can have a mentor outside of even that direct household that you're in that can put a young adult in line with a future that they never see.
Yeah.
But they got to believe it.
Well, and I think it takes that interaction, or that if you had only ever seen failed marriages, now I wouldn't sit here and say your marriage couldn't have been successful because I'm a pastor. I believe in the redemption of Jesus Christ, and
there's a 94% chance that my marriage fails based on staying in that realm of only seeing failed marriages around me. I have a 6% chance of success.
Yeah, and see that's the same thing we see. I mean, it's a high percentage of a child that lives the majority of their life in poverty. The likelihood that they're going to then be in poverty.
Absolutely.
And that's the thing of where we've got, as the Salvation Army, we've got that opportunity to step in there.
Yeah.
And if we're just providing rent and utility assistance, we're not stepping in there. We're saying this is how you live this life. You come see us when you get to,
that's not the cause.
But when we truly step in and now we're working, with the family, and many a times it starts with that interaction, because that's where a family first kind of opens up. Okay, you've come into rent and utility, and we begin to work with you, and now we begin to see, okay, what else is there that you need help with or need services, and we begin to make that interaction, and then life skill classes or opportunities of course, Dave Ramsey's the big financial piece university. There's a lot of churches that do that. Can we connect you in with a church that offers that?
Absolutely.
Or other financial advisors that'll begin to help you and show you the things that you need in order to be successful, or success defined as getting to that point of self-sufficiency. We can begin to work with you on those things, and then that's that interaction that then changes that and has that opportunity to change that.
Well, the Dave Ramsey deal is a good avenue for folks that it's something that they can get plugged into immediately. You can start at any given point, right? But Dave also says openly, I will always have a job because there will always be people who mismanage their money.
Yeah.
And he's right. I mean, because you see it again, repeated time after time after time. So, you guys being able to plug folks into mentors, job skill training, I look at things like Big Brothers, Big Sister program, things like that, where there's a mentor along the way that can guide someone. Because it can't just be the Salvation Army 100% of the time, but it can be the Salvation Army, again, working as a bridge to get them plugged in over here, that this is maybe the gap. It's maybe the one piece that's missing to get this kid over the hump, to get this young adult over the hump, even to get this old adult over the hump, to realize that there's a better way to do this, and it's much funner on this side of the bridge than it is over where you're over. I think much funner. I don't think that's the word, but it's better over here for you to be living in this world than it is to try and survive over here in this world. So let's walk forward to, we're going to step into the storm from last week.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't think I'm going to reach anybody here that isn't going to know what happened last week, but obviously it was one of the first times ever, I think, in Texas, it might be in Texas history, that there was not a single county in the state of Texas that was not under a winter storm warning.
Right.
And I think I heard some ridiculous number, like 70% of the United States was covered in snow at some point last week. So Texas, again, unprecedented. I think the last time we had seen weather here, I think locally, was 1903, I think. I mean, we got down to single-digit numbers. We obviously, and people who are up north, this is always kind of the funny thing, is they're like, come on, man, we're negative 20s up here. Yeah. You know, y'all are built for that. There's snow plows. There's things that are in place to take care of that. We are in complete shutdown mode when we get to that. So I had a friend last week that had posted out on social media, and this was right before the hard freeze came, when we got into single digits, saying, hey, I just drove past Salvation Army and there's a line around the building for people. Again, I don't drive that way. I'm not over there, but I'm like, oh, you know, and then you sit there and go, man, I got that extra jacket. I got that extra blanket. I've got this stuff. And so if you would kind of tell people what you experienced last week walking through that front side before the real cold stuff came, and then what you're seeing on the after effect now that the storm has kind of passed through. And, you know, it's like Texas, the Powerball lottery, just throwing out numbers like, you know, we're 3, 27, 62, 5, you know. So what have you seen last week leading up into that? What are you seeing right now that it's kind of cleared the path of Texas, but then there's still this need that's still coming to your doorstep? And what are you foreseeing that's going to be coming in the next coming couple of weeks?
Yeah. So, you know, during the winter season, you know, we always have things like heaters and blankets and jackets available. A lot of times, of course, being in Texas, there's not normally that much of a need for those things, especially where we live in Texas. But anytime we begin to see where we're going to have a long period, extended period of cold weather, and you know, when they were projecting the unforeseen temperatures, you know, at first you always have a thing of like, well, let's wait and see if it's really going to be true. But, you know.
The weather people are never right.
Yeah. But about, you know, a week before, we knew, like, this is not, you know, it's being projected. You know, if they miss by a few degrees, we're still in 10-degree weather, you know.
Life-threatening.
You know, so we began getting the word out that we had blankets, we had heaters, we had jackets available. And, you know, we're nowhere near expecting the power situation that we faced. And so many people came in looking for the heaters. And we were, you know, with those, we were still giving out blankets and jackets to make sure people had those. And thankfully, as word got out of the need we were meeting, we also got an increase in donations of blankets and jackets. And like I said, at that time, I think people were kind of taking those as just an extra thing. Like, yeah, well, I got the heater, but yeah, go ahead and give me a blanket and a jacket. Little did we know, because of the power situation, those would become the big items that were needed. And so I think we gave out over 400 blankets and jackets to individuals and about 100 heaters out. And so we were doing that just as a preempt, you know, again, not knowing really how bad things would get. But we got those out and got, you know, a lot of families those to make sure they were as prepared as possible for the storm that was coming. And then, you know, Sunday hits, and we actually deployed a team with our disaster unit over to Walker County because they were opening a cold weather shelter. And so our mobile kitchen and team deployed over there to serve that cold weather shelter. And I think even Sunday night, I think they had maybe 10 people in the shelter that was prepared to hold at least 50 and I think it ended up, they had to increase capacity to about 70 and opened up a secondary cold weather shelter when it was all said and done. But, you know, even that first night, I think we all thought we'd be able to kind of weather it out in our homes. It was really there for those individuals that didn't have homes and things like that. But then obviously
the rolling
blackouts hit, power outages hit, and all of a sudden, you know, that shelter becomes overwhelmed. Stuff locally began becoming overwhelmed, and it became a much, you know, dire situation as we continued to work to meet need in those situations. And so along with that, we continue to give out coats and things to individuals in need to hopefully give them whatever they could to kind of weather through that storm. A lot of people were able to go to Reed Arena, and that was ran locally by the Red Cross, and the food bank did a great job with that, and what they were able to do there for our community. And so that, I think, literally saved lives with that work being done, and just amazing effort. And once again, we saw the community kind of rise up and help support each other as well, with individuals taking people into their house and things like that. And just really, I think, for the number of things that we did not see coming, it was really kind of responding in the moment from there forward to try to get people the resources they needed just to get through those next few days. And thankfully now we're in the 70-degree side of it. But now what we know is we had a week where basically our community and economy was shut down, which, in an economy that was already kind of stretched thin because of COVID. Now, again, you have people that lost out on a week of income because work was closed, or, had to throw out everything in the fridge. And, like I said, my wife and I just moved in June, and you don't necessarily, I think of our weekly grocery bill, but then when you have to replenish the whole fridge, the additional things, and it's not just the 1 week bill, it just becomes exponential. And so we really see many of our financial assistance programs are going to be, again,
strapped.
Pressed to the max because of the fact of this storm. Because now families that were maybe starting to figure it out, starting to turn that corner, now they've experienced, we just lost a week's worth of income, and we've got to replenish the fridge and do those things. And so, many people might think, oh, utility bills are going to be down because the power is off so much. But, that's,
it's not what we're hearing, obviously.
Right. And we're going to see, that need still be there for rent and utility assistance, and an increased level that we'll need to be able to meet that at.
Well, think about what we said earlier. People living paycheck to paycheck, right?
Right.
And literally half of that paycheck is gone for that next week.
Right.
So it may not be a full paycheck that got gone, but half of the paycheck that got gone. But they also didn't, in paycheck to paycheck, like you said, don't have to replenish an entire food system in their house. They don't have to pay I don't want to jinx anything here, but they don't have to pay an electric bill that's double or triple what it would normally be. But again, so this is going to be a long stretch process for the Salvation Army as well too. People who, I don't know, prepared's the right word, but let's just say they were blessed in the idea that their power didn't go out as much, or they didn't lose food, or they were a little more prepared on the front side of it, or whatever. I mean, I was putting on my social media stuff that I did when we were up in the north. We lived in Amarillo, we lived in Omaha. So I did things like fill my bathtub with water. So when our water actually did freeze up, we could still use the toilets and things like that. Man, you say that kind of stuff to a South Texan, they don't have a clue of what you're talking about. I'm just trying to put it out there from the perspective of, here's some things to expect when it gets this cold, because this is stuff that happens. Go fill your car up with gas, because if you have a little amount of gas in there, there's a high probability for a long-term freeze that your gas will gel up in your car.
Yeah.
Ask a South Texan about gelling up gas in a car. Ask them what stay-bill is, where you have to put that in there to ensure that their gas doesn't do that. I mean, these are all things that preparedness is only as good as what you've experienced, right? Same deal for you guys. There's no way y'all would have seen rolling blackouts as an issue. You just see it as, look, there's going to be cold, so we have two things to face here: getting people warm, getting people fed. Yeah. So if warm is housing, if warm is blankets, jacket, heater, fed is, making sure that people have a food supply to get through this process, that's probably the initial roadmap that you've got in front of you. But what precedence sets that you're doing rolling blackouts through the entire state of Texas that's completely beyond anybody's control, nor was conversation on the front side of any of this that it was going to happen? Again, not blaming the energy companies, because the energy companies are in the same boat of going, we have unprecedented draw that's never happened in our lifetime to be able to even say that a power grid can pull this kind of amperage or megawattage, whatever you want to, whatever the number is. I'm not an electrician, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express one time. So everybody's working in an unprecedented crisis, and it is a crisis. And it's a crisis of magnitude that I don't think people had a full comprehension of. If you're outside of the state and you saw, come on, man, Texas just got some snow and some ice, man. It's no big deal. Well, think of it in this aspect. Harvey hits the Gulf Coast, and you've got flooding, major flooding, unprecedented 55 inch. I mean, we got 55 inches of rain here in College Station. And you've got flooding that's happened in this southern location of Texas, and everybody's deploying there, and out-of-state resources are coming in to help those locations. But you're talking about the southern portion and the beach location of Texas, 75 miles in, maybe 90 miles in. You're talking about the entire state of Texas in this other aspect here. And like you were saying earlier, those resources that would normally come into a localized disaster, now what do? I mean, there's not enough resources to take on the state of Texas as it is. And so now those resources now fall directly to local. And there were, how are you to see that without a roadmap that tells you, hey, by the way, Timothy, you're going to have this deal where you're going to give out blankets and jackets and heaters and everything else. We're going to complicate this a little bit more for you and tell you that, 85, 90% of your community is going to go through rolling blackouts, where they maybe got power for 30 minutes and maybe don't have power for, I'd love to say, I think 30 and 30 from who I heard, that would have been a blessing. Yeah. I mean, I think it was more like 30 and 5 hours and, things like that. So that challenge becomes even greater. Now those places, like, who would have saw through this, that Reed Arena needs to become a warming station for people, not necessarily that are homeless, but are people who can't heat their house because they can't get electric to their house to heat it. And
that's the thing. Typically when we think cold weather shelter, we think homeless. We need to be able to house the homeless population that's not already in shelters, that's not already in houses. We're not thinking, we need cold weather shelter to house people who aren't going to have power for extended hours. And even if we are thinking that or have a contingency for that, we're not thinking of it in the quantities that it was. And that's what we saw. And I mean, even locally, like I said, we committed a unit to the Walker County, Huntsville area in preparation because they were expecting more homeless individuals in that shelter. But then when it came time where the need was greater here, we then become strapped for resources even locally. And that's happening in just about every county in Texas that's in the same situation. It's not just that we can't get resources in to meet Texas. It's also within a county, everything's spread thin, and we're kind of meeting what need we can, but knowing that we're not at the level we would like to be in meeting that need because of just the sheer mass of the need that ended up happening.
Well, and the timing's terrible. I mean, you're coming off of 2020 COVID on the backside here where your donations are down. We were talking about that before we came on, and I don't want to bury this number in here, so I'm not going to ask you the number yet. I don't want to bury it in this conversation because I think people need to hear that number. But you're coming on the backside of a down year, and so your resources are limited because of that. And you're going into potentially, I don't even know potentially is the word anymore. You went into what will probably historically go down as one of the worst weather incidents that has happened, that has affected a larger mass location in literally Texas. And you have no way to account for that or prepare for that. And again, this is where local rises up to meet need, right? And so, in the conversation leading up to, hey, it's going to be 4 degrees outside, and people going, oh man, I've got jackets and blankets and extras, and I don't need that stuff. Now it's almost the idea you start seeing people on social media that weren't even planning on being impacted by this. I got a place to stay. I got heat. I got water. I got everything I need. I went to the grocery store. I got everything that I need. And boom, no power. Or they're literally iced in. Car doesn't work anymore because the battery is not, cranking in that time. And so now it's neighbor helping neighbor, because I can't even get to you if I'm trying to get to you to get services because it's too dangerous for me to be out on the road. And same vice versa the other way. You guys can't go house to house and check on everybody. The resources just aren't there for that. But the pull into the resources that you did have, I mean, did it wipe you?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the blankets, the heaters, I mean, we cleaned out of those things. I mean, we have a few left of blankets and jackets, but the other thing we know is that like that is now not the need. Obviously,
70 degrees outside
as we sit in these warmer temperatures. But now the focus becomes, okay, do we have the financial resources to meet the needs that are going to come as a byproduct of this past week? You know, if families are dealing with pipes or things like that, those are unforeseen expenses and
being displaced from their house because of damage, things along those lines.
Right. So, I mean, we have many of things that we're going to continue to be addressing and finding new situations. Now, the good thing is our team's kind of used to that in the last year, but that's what we're faced with now is, so yeah, I mean, we got pretty much cleaned out of those resources. Don't really, at this point, don't have a need to replenish those resources, thankfully, but it's going to be the additional. Yeah, I know. Come on, keep the lights on. But it's going forward. We don't just like we didn't necessarily have a full scope of what the need would be because it's such an unforeseen situation. Yeah, we don't necessarily have a full scope of what will it be going forward. Yeah. What's the impact? And I mean, I think that's in a lot of areas in our community. Businesses. There's so many businesses that are just already on that. Walking a hairline and now all of a sudden you lost a week of business. It's where does that put them? And those are the things that I think we're going to see continue to play out in the weeks and days to come and probably months to come. And I definitely think, we definitely need more resources to continue to meet more need, but what exactly how expansive that's going to be is kind of the thing we don't fully know right now.
Immediate resources for you guys now is that cash donation.
That's a huge one because of rent and utility, and then dry goods to help us supplement our food pantry because we know we're going to see more families that need food.
Something has to give here. I mean, let's assume that. I hate saying it because I'm going to talk it into existence here. But let's assume double electric bills.
Yeah.
Double charge. I mean, to the family that is paycheck to paycheck or the family that lost a half a paycheck. And nothing's going to stop. I mean, the electric company's not going to go, hey, man, we're going to let you slide on this one. Although I did see a funny meme about somebody saying, well, had rolling blackouts, so hopefully you expect rolling payments. And but that's going to show up on somebody's doorstep that, hey man, if I'd been able to keep working and if I hadn't experienced damage in my house that I've now got to come off of 1% of my deductible to fix or whatever, now this pool starts, chipping away at anything that, even if, like you said earlier, even if they had it saved, they're probably going to be that plus. Right. And so now the need becomes greater and you don't have a roadmap for this. Again, you're flying blind into this. This could possibly be that next week you could end up with a line outside with electric bills in their hands.
Yeah. And this coming week fires up we begin booking our appointments for rent and utility for the next month. And really our usual process is we have a budgeted amount that we can spend each month on those things. And right now that budget hasn't increased so we have this increased need, but yet financially we've not been able to increase that yet. Yeah. We hope that, maybe through some donations or things like that, we will be able to increase that and serve more families. But it's really dependent upon, that the money coming in that then will allow us to address that need and meet that need. And it's going to be key. And I think, like I said, we've seen this community step up time and time again and meet those needs. And so, that's what we're kind of expecting and trusting again now. But, that's what's going to be necessary for us to continue to meet that need. I just think
it's imperative that, for those families that are, hey man, we're good. We got it. We survived it. We'll move on. It's imperative that those guys hear this because again, it's like, if it's not at my doorstep, then it's not really in my line of sight of consideration. So when you say, some people would walk out and go, man, I'll bet that they're wiped out of blankets and heaters and jackets. And so now they show up with a truckload of blankets and jackets and heaters, and you're going, thanks. I mean, you're not going to turn it away. And you're also going to pray that it doesn't go back down into single digits, but that's not the immediate need.
Right.
The next immediate need off of this is probably going to be financial.
Right.
And probably, again, in a pool that you probably have not seen before and that you can't plan for. And again, so it was like, hey, man, if we knew that Snowpocalypse 21 was coming, we could have done some fundraising before all that. And now it's knee deep in the middle of it, and people are going to show up in desperate times because they have had damage, because they have missed paychecks, because I was already unemployed because of COVID, and now here's something else. That struggle, you're right. The community will step up, but the community steps up when the community knows.
Right.
And so those, KBTX stories and things like that, online fundraising, which again, we'll get into for the Salvation Army. Those are all pieces of the equation that the money has to go to the direct need locally first. Whereas if this doesn't happen and there was money coming in, then that's money to go to other programs over here. I was reading like $200 donation to the Salvation Army. Prior to all of this, $200 donation to the Salvation Army puts a vet in a housing situation with counseling for a week.
Yeah.
Again, that's awesome. But when that resource locally doesn't become the high priority, where that money has to come from somewhere. You're not being who's funding you outside of donations?
That's it.
So, we can't think of it in the terms that the government's going to come and bail this one out.
Right.
So it has to be neighbor taking care of neighbor, community rising to the occasion to raise the money necessary to take care of those who found themselves in situations by no fault of their own, literally in a situation that nobody could have planned for. And so if you can't plan for it as an organization, they can't plan for it as being right in the middle of their storm, literally. Now something has to rise to the occasion to fill the gap, because this gap's going to be huge.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I wanted to get to, talking about what the immediate need is going to be, because the immediate need now is not jackets and blankets and heaters. The immediate need is probably financial and food. Yeah. And so, food, people are probably pretty good to jump on quickly. And again, you guys, I'm sure, work with the food banks and everything else. But again, the draw on those guys is just as big, if not overextending what they're normally used to. And so now it becomes letting people know, hey, listen, anything you can do to help us. I'm not telling you don't bring us jackets and blankets and heaters. If you feel the need that you need to drop those off and you found they're extra, you're going to take them. But immediate need that's going to arise to the next deal that you're not going to be able to foresee, how much it's going to cost and what that's going to be. You don't want to turn people away. You don't want to not be able to rise up to meet the gap that people are going to need to fill. But it's coming. It's just a natural knee-jerk reaction to this. And it's not just Bryan College Station. It's all over Texas that you're going to see that. It's just you can literally follow the swatch of the storm, and it's, wherever it made contact is what it's going to create. So let's talk on that, because now I think everybody needs to go from, we're sitting here going, hey, man, if you can donate, please do that. But I want to step back to 2020's numbers. Local. So national for the Salvation Army last year was an 18% decrease in donations, which accounted to about $60 million for the national level. National?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to make sure I got that right, because I'm sure globally it was way worse than that. But what was it locally for you?
Locally, right in the midst of COVID, we saw an increase of donation for specific COVID assistance. But then kind of across our other donation sources, and especially as we've gotten away from, we've gotten further into COVID, we've not gotten away from it, that's for sure. But we've seen about a decrease of about 12% over our funding sources. And so, the hope is that, of course, as things rebound, that will rebound as well. But, and thankfully we're continuing to meet things at an increased need, and because of some of the funding we got early on. But now when adding something like this, it just puts that funding even more strapped. And as we what we're seeing is a need for more and more.
Right.
Not that I don't think our need level is going to recede anytime soon. No. And so especially because now it's like this, someone that might have weathered the COVID situation financially, now all of a sudden a week like this has been the thing that broke,
devastated them.
The straw that broke the camel's back type deal. And so, we continue to see those demands on our funding sources, and, we have to kind of begin to introduce things that are going to help people get out of the situation financially that they've found themselves in because of COVID.
Right.
To help rebound them and to make sure that this doesn't lead to all of a sudden a larger percentage of our population living in homelessness or poverty. And so that's kind of the situation we find ourselves in as far as need for support of our programs and our initiatives going forward.
So I was surprised to hear that, when people think of the Salvation Army, the number one fundraiser that they visually see in front of them is the Red Kettle.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And I was surprised to hear that 50% of your donations happen between November and December.
Yeah. So about in the red buckets alone, about $200,000 comes in through those red buckets in past years. This year we were down around about 175,000.
Significant.
Yeah. And that's a month of utility and rent assistance in the past. It's about $25,000. Now, then, as well as the Red Kettle campaign, of course, during that time, a lot of people, especially this year, they can't maybe make it out to a store. They'll send a check in, or we do some mail appeal campaigns that reach out to people. And in that total time of about November 1st to December 31st, we raise about 50% of our operating budget for the fiscal year. And so really a key time, and it really sets up what we're able to do
in those months,
in the following calendar year in as far as service.
Yeah.
And so, this year being down in kettles definitely has an impact, and we're hoping we can make it up maybe in other areas in order to continue to meet the need and also be able to continue to meet an increased need that we've seen.
So again, something that I want the community to be able to hear here is, we get accustomed to seeing and hearing the bell, and they're in front of the stores and everything else, and we do our parts when we're going through there. And COVID probably just in general there, spooked some people, I'm sure, where I'm not going out into those places I don't want to touch the money. Whatever. I mean, whatever that looks like.
Right.
But the important part that I think we were discussing before we came on air here that I want people to hear is also the need for the volunteer role and the mechanism to have people in those locations. More volunteers that you have, more kettle locations that you can round up and organize with businesses in most cases, with businesses that you can put a bell ringer in front of to raise money at. But we were talking before we came on air that what happened in November and December, A&M decides, hey, we're going to run to Thanksgiving, and we're not coming back until the second week in January. Yeah. Right. And there goes, I'm definitely going to exceed this number because it's not this number, but there's 68,000 students in that. Right.
Right.
Poof. Go virtual, don't come back.
Yeah.
They're not here. And some of those are student organizations that help you in that process. They help man up some of the stuff. You've got, kids that are out there that are trying to do their part in the community to help with raising the money through the Salvation Army by ringing a bell somewhere. And now that resource isn't there for you.
Right.
And that's a huge resource. I mean, we're talking about almost probably maybe at this rate, probably a fifth, but we'll call it a fourth of the population that disappears. And in the COVID world already, that's already, you're already seeing the skeptical, I don't know that I want to be out and about with all these people. I'm thinking in terms of my retail history where what's one of the biggest, days that you're going to raise money in front of a Walmart is probably going to be a Black Friday, where you got a ton of people that walk into the store, all looking to purchase on that one day. It's one of our busiest days of the year, right? Doing over $1 million in sales in most of these stores, and that's gone. We're no longer doing Black Fridays because that's not COVID friendly to have, stampedes of people running through doors, breathing on people, So these are all things that again, backside of it is, if we don't talk about it, we don't think about it. And so you go through that November and December with all of these things stacked against you. You don't have the resources that you would normally have during those months to be able to collect. And you got skepticism from the public that being out in these locations, especially high traffic, high volume locations, for some people is just a no-go. Elderly folks and things like that are not planning on going out and getting into a crowd of 1,000 people that are out shopping somewhere. So that's all working against you. Y'all go to an online program where, you try to offset a little bit of that through online, donations. The Angel Tree program doesn't go away, and we were talking about that again before we went on air, is your need for the Angel Tree actually went way up.
Right.
So what were those numbers again?
So we saw about 25% increase in applicants. We went from 800 applicants, that's families, to 1,000 families, which that leads to about being an additional 500 children that need to get adopted from the Angel Tree.
Right.
So we started out knowing going into the season that we had 500 additional children that we had to get adopted in a time where number of donors are decreasing, students are leaving early, and that impacted us because there's a student group that leads an adoption campaign of those angels. And because of them having to leave early and move their whole campaign online, that was down another 500. So we actually, now we need the community to make up 1,000 angels above and beyond kind of what they had done last year. And so, and most of those angels, the value of what's in the bag comes out to, on average, about $50.
Yeah.
So you're talking $50,000 worth of toys and things that,
directly out of people's pockets from somewhere.
Right. Yeah. That it's where, how are we going to make that up? And, amazingly, the community again came around and met that challenge and stepped up to that. But, those are the things that we're seeing across the table, is that everything's seeing that kind of increase in that need. And, and thankfully, through whether it's donated goods or things like that, we're continuing to be able to meet that need, but it's not ceasing. We're continuing to see that increase, and things like Angel Tree. We're continuing to meet the need, but also we're kind of completely changing the way in which we do everything because of COVID. Yeah. The application process used to be a face-to-face application process for families. Now that had to be moved all online. Yeah. And I can tell you, last year, 2020, March 2020, there were no plans for an online portion of that process. And then by September, we're doing the whole thing online. That's just,
crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. And still having to do everything to the same level, if not more than what we've done in the past. We have to verify that families qualify for that. And so figuring out ways that families could send us information, but yet we also need to be able to protect the information. Right. Those are all the obstacles that are kind of being addressed behind the scenes so that we can continue to meet need and do it safely. Our food pantry had to be moved. It used to be people would come in, check in, and get their food and take their basket out to their car. Now that had to be turned into a complete drive-through food pantry. And I mean, that's a complete overhaul of a system of how we get that food out. And in the midst of that, we're seeing the need for that double on a weekly basis. And so, it's not just change the whole system, but it's change it and do it at a larger quantity. And that's kind of some of the pressure and things that we've continued to do during COVID. And it was the same thing with the Red Kettle effort is, there was a point where we weren't sure would stores even let us stand out. And many of the stores allowed us to this year, which was amazing. But now there's even more pressure on that campaign to be successful because we need more funds than we ever needed before to meet this increased need. And so that's the challenge that we continue to face. And, little obstacles here and there have a big impact. A lot of the stores, because of safety protocols, and completely understandable, completely rightfully so, they had us require us to move that kettle sign and stand a certain distance away from the door. And in some places that was cutting income in half at that location. Yep. And so, it's things like that are, that those little things start adding up, and just then our volunteers were down about 40% for our Red Kettle effort, and again that's about 400 hours, and if volunteers raise about $50 an hour, which is about the average we see for volunteers, that's $20,000. And so those are the things that we're adding up kind of across the board, and that we continue to see. I mean, Christmas, because that's such a big time for us, it was magnified, but we're seeing that on similar scale throughout the rest of the year. And so just I say that to say the increased reliance we have on the community to continue to meet that need, whether it's through volunteering or through donations, to help us to continue to serve the community.
Yeah, and listen, most of Salvation Army's fundraising is visual, meaning out of sight, out of mind. I was telling you, normally we go into the mall and there'd be a big tree and all these, angel tags hanging on them, and you go pick your angel tags and go shop it. Tree's not there, So again, it's kind of like, I can remember, and the trigger for us this year wasn't my wife and I, it was my daughter going, "Hey, we're going to get angel tree gifts this year, right?" Yeah. And I'm like, we need to do that. Like, yeah, we need to get that done. It's getting close. Like, and the first thing was, let's go to the mall. Let's go pick 2 and we'll go get them. We go to the mall. Hey, where you guys have the angel tree at? Oh, we don't have it this year. It's all online. And we're like, oh, okay. But again, we were programmed that's where we went. Every year we go to that big tree and we just start plucking names off of there, and we go and fill them and bring them back and drop them off at the table. And even the table looked different on the drop off this year. I mean, so you have that. If the red kettle's not there, again, that's a visual and an audible at the same time. If you don't have that, then again, that money is going to naturally decrease just because that's the programming that's taken place. You also have the luncheon. That is another big part of your fundraiser as well. Again, an in-person. How do you? Right. Yeah. How do you?
I mean, that had to go virtual last year, and thankfully raised similar funding, but still, I think especially for the Salvation Army, I know it was one of the first virtual luncheons. Yeah. And I mean, a great. I don't get to take credit for that one because I wasn't here yet, but it was a great step in innovative direction to go that way. A lot of people were at that point still postponing, thinking that maybe September would bring us something better, but, or canceling, just outright canceling, which is, a significant financial impact for those locations that did that. But then, here for them to have that innovative approach, it raised the key dollars we needed at such a key time, but then it also helped many other Salvation Armies because they kind of laid the groundwork and the model of what that would look like to secure funding, and which again has become critical funding. Because of the need and the service that we have to provide.
Again, I don't want to speak anything to an existence here, but if virtual becomes the way of the future, then again, visual no longer becomes the knee-jerk reaction. I mean, you think, I've lived the kettle life forever. I've lived it as the customer who drops stuff off in there. I've lived it as the manager who has, them out in front of my store. And you're not going to tell me that I've watched it time and time again where somebody walks up and the bell's ringing. They're like, "Hey, you got an extra $1 or something in your purse there?" And they reach in and boom, it happens. That doesn't happen if it's not there, and it doesn't happen if it goes virtually.
Yeah, I mean, one of the amazing things they tell us is that one of the first places that a lot of kids learn about giving to people in need is at that red kettle. Because they walk out and they say, "Why is this crazy person ringing this bell?" Standing out here in the cold weather and stuff. And it's more of a genuine, honest question than that. And for the first time, parents go, "Well, this is they're doing this because someone needs Christmas, someone needs someone's homeless," and so for a lot of kids, that's the first place they learn about it.
Listen, I've got a picture of myself and my niece standing out in front of the Walmart store in Madisonville that I was running, ringing a bell, doing our hour for the kettle to raise money there. And again, for her, probably one of the first experiences that she has face to face. That we're not just going to, of course, she's stuck with me, so that's a bigger problem for her, because I'm not going to let her just sit there and ring the bell. I'm going to, you need to greet people, you need to welcome them, wish them Merry Christmas, do all this other stuff here. And, I want you actively engaged in this, right? And I've got pictures of us standing in front of the door, and again, her being able to see it firsthand, and then also understanding, like, it's not a matter of, I don't want you to learn that a lot of people pass the kettle and never put anything in it. Yeah. I want you to learn that it's important that we do our part to get people to stop. And that's more of an experience with those folks. Yeah, there are those folks that just, I normally drop $1 in, or I normally drop a 5 or a 10 or whatever. But if I can create the experience by just having a quick conversation with somebody and hold them there for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, by having that conversation, it's a lot harder to walk away and not put something in the kettle. But it's hard to find those people too that are engaging, because you listen, just the same way you can find people over there that are sitting there with the bell and they're dink 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 dink, and that's all they do. And you're not going to complain about it, because they're doing a service, again, on their own time as a volunteer to get money into that kettle. But some do it really well. Yeah. And it is, again, the experience that they create. And I can guarantee you that's a direct correlation to how much money ends up in that kettle at the end of the night. So, but again, if people that you relied on, groups that you relied on, kids, college students, businesses, whatever that you rely on to help aid as a part of that go away, then again, it's not a matter of, we'll just, get these folks. Yeah. Or, how do you replace a pool of 68,000 people? Yeah. How do you replace 4 major businesses that garnered you, $20,000 the year before for an entire kettle run, in front of their businesses that now have closed up shop and aren't there anymore? So, and we were saying the more volunteers that you have that can man kettles and do kettle time allows you the opportunity to open more spots with kettles. Right. And so what you'd love to be able to have is, I don't have enough kettles to open, across all of these locations that people are volunteering for. But then it's also the idea that most of the people that are volunteering for you are volunteering an hour or 2 hours out of their day there. It's not a volunteer for, 18-hour days to go out there and do it. So, I think when I told you my goal here was to put the Salvation Army in the lens and really clarify the lens to people who are listening to this, and getting them to put all those pieces together. If I said, if I take somebody in here from off the streets and I said, do you think Salvation Army's donations were up or down last year? They're going to say down. Yeah. They're going to get it. They understand, but if we take and we tighten the lens up here and we give dollars and numbers, right, then we give the whys. Now we have the disaster, plus all the stuff you just came off of. Like, if I sat here and go, how many more kids do you think were on the tree this year that weren't on there last year? Nobody's going to sit in that chair and say 1,000. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so, and I say 1,000, that's not an accurate number, but 1,000 based on what our discussion was about who was handling this with the student group and everything else, that there's a shortage of 1,000 there. Nobody's going to say 1,000. That number is not going to come up out of anybody's mind, because that number is a ridiculous number for somebody to throw off the cuff. They're like, yeah, it was probably up. I'd imagine it's probably 50, 100 kids, something like that. Right. And so we get on here and we talk about those numbers again, thinking about, okay, Red Kettle program was down 12%. So we know those donations were down. Amount of need was up. This 1,000 kids that we needed to figure out how to cover up and get. We go 2 months from that window, and we now have a natural disaster that happens that nobody foresees, that's going to suck the resources right out of the Salvation Army here locally. And then where do we meet that need? Right. Because in the same sense, and I think this is what I was really, gosh, I won't say excited, but I mean, I told you earlier, if we had this podcast 2 weeks ago, this doesn't get discussed. Right. We might discuss the tail end of 2020. But we don't have a single line of sight as to what we just came out of last week. And so now it's the same deal. The Salvation Army, their goal is to step up and fill the gap. But now what you need, I say the Salvation Army needs is for the community to step up and fill the gap, because there's going to be a huge one here.
Yeah,
and it's not by any fault of anybody.
Right.
It's not through lack of fundraising. It's not through lack of effort. It's not through leadership. It's not through any of those things. It's through mere supply and demand right now. And so the demand will be way higher than the supply. And so, again, what does that look like? If somebody's listening to this and go, listen, man, I can get a box of food out of my pantry and bring it to you, great. That's one more box that you did not have at the start of all of this stuff. But maybe it is that, if we're asking people to fill the gap, man, what better time to do it right now than tax season's coming around? People maybe are getting a little bit more money in their pocket. And instead of you going out there and getting the 80-inch TV, maybe you can dial it back to a 72-inch TV and give the rest to the Salvation Army. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we have to step up into the gap as a community to fill. And you're in the community, because let me tell you, I mean, I've sat in this chair time and time again when we talk about small businesses that are trying to recover. There is not a better community to be in than Bryan College Station to have that need met by the community. But again, it has to be vocalized, it has to be visualized, it has to be something that people understand. That right now, people that are coming out of it, Salvation Army is probably nowhere on their radar. But if, like I said, it came on my radar when I have that one friend that puts the post of, there's a line around the building of people that are trying to get in there and get stuff. So if you've got jackets, if you've got blankets, if you've got heaters, bring them. They can use them. Not on my radar, but that one little social media post coming across, like, man, think about that. I know there's organizations out there that are helping. I know there's places out there that are trying to get people in line for it. But who would have envisioned that we would have gone through what we went through? Yeah. And how do you prepare for that?
Right.
There's no way.
Yeah, and normally we don't realize the depth of the need.
Yeah.
Because we don't think of there's a line around the building size need for jackets and heaters, but there is, and it's not necessarily just homeless individuals. It's people that, the house doesn't have good ventilation or things like that, and so, and then of course the need became quite greater with the actual outcome of the storm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, you can't foresee it. You can't plan for it. Now it's more reactionary purposes, but reaction now for you really needs to be the community reaction. I mean, you guys are still going to have people show up. I mean, tomorrow's going to look just like it did, the day before. I mean, there's not a day that comes y'all don't have somebody there, right?
No, I mean, we've always got somebody, because normally beginning of the month, or like this week, we now start booking appointments for the next month for people that need rent and utility assistance. And so those appointments go throughout the month, and then on Wednesdays is food distribution, so it's always a busy day. And then there's always people that just show up. All of a sudden a need has arisen and they've come in, and we do our best to meet that as we can at that time. And
so earlier when I talked about volunteers, we also should back that up a little bit also and say on-site volunteers there is also encouraged as well. People to be able to help out there also, because you're working with 7 staff.
Yeah, especially,
and then you and your wife.
Yeah, especially on Wednesdays. That's our big food distribution day. If someone can just even come out from the hours of 8:30 to 10:30, that's the mass of the individuals in need come in during that time. And if we have 8 volunteers, they can basically run the soup kitchen with just a few of our staff helping with the check-in process, and that saves close to $200 to $500 worth of staff expense just in that time. And that's a kid to camp. That's a kid. That's a few. That's, if it's $500, that's 2 utility bills. Those are the type of impact that volunteering has. It just allows us to put more resources back into serving the community.
And it's a great opportunity, again, to bring your kid along. I don't want to advocate taking your kid out of school here, but it's
during the summer.
It's a great opportunity to bring your kid along so that they can see the need as well too, especially when you have somebody that's privileged. And I'm not using that word as, uppity or anything like that, but privileged to be able to have a food source, privileged to be able to have shelter, privileged to be able to have utilities paid for. Those things are all met. And there are many a times, we would do the Thanksgiving meal delivery, and I'd take my daughter along for that so that she understood 2 things. Number one, we're taking this to somebody that if we didn't, they wouldn't be able to probably eat. And then secondly, when we took it to them, we were typically invited into the house, And my daughter got an opportunity to see the housing issues, in a lot of cases where we walk into some place and then we walk out and she's talking about, I want to get them this. I want to give this away. I mean, that's how we grow a generation of compassionate people who are constantly looking to volunteer and give back into their community that has supported them, right? So move on to a couple other things here. I won't spend a ton of time on this, but again, this is more informational for people. We talked about the concert partnership. Yeah. And this kind of came onto my radar because my wife is going to Dallas, I think this following week, to go to a Toby Mac concert. So Awakening Events is setting up these concerts that they can find more about online on the Salvation Army's website. That will show you mostly Christian artists that are partnering with Awakening Events to be able to give portions of those ticket sales and event fundraising there back into their local Salvation Armies and other projects and fundraising needs that are in those communities to be able to give back. So I looked at it as, hey, this is a win-win. You get to go see one of your favorite artists there, and a portion of those ticket sales goes back into the community as well too. So I don't want to negate that. Now, we may not see these artists come to Bryan College Station, but again, knowing that if you're driving to Houston and Austin to San Antonio, kind of in that little triangle for us of major metro, that going to those concerts, buying a ticket to go to those concerts, again, has a longer impact than, well, I'm paying for the artist to put on the show. Yeah, that's always a part of it, and you're putting money in their pocket. But for these artists to step forward and be able to then turn back around and give that back as a part of that entire concert series and events, and there's a list of them that are all listed on there so that you know where they're coming to in your town or near your town. I'd be remiss if I didn't sit there and bring this forward to people, because I think there are people in our community that travel to those concerts anyway, but they probably don't have an idea that those artists are actually doing that until they're actually maybe even at the show, in some cases where they're talking about it and they've got literature and signage and things like that at the show on it. But it's on the website for Salvation Army for people to be able to go to and be able to see that in its works and how it's being given back.
And those are great, great things of ways to support the Salvation Army. And maybe locally it helps encourage a business owner or an individual to see that, sometimes you can do fundraisers through your business.
Absolutely.
If you're an artist, maybe it's giving a portion back of those ticket sales towards the Salvation Army. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's, if you're a business owner, finding a way to give, I know a lot of restaurants do like profit share nights, things like that. Those things are huge and
food
great,
drives.
Great way to partner with the Salvation Army. And a lot of times those things do attract individuals, especially, millennials love supporting something that's going towards a cause, right, and having an impact greater than just, if the meal I'm having is not just feeding me, but it's helping someone in need. That's something that they really engage well with.
They'll make the extra effort to show up.
Right. And so I think, those are great things, ways to help raise awareness as well as support a great local cause.
Right. So let's finish this thing off with 2021 outlook and then goals and events that are coming up that people need to know about. So 2021 outlook right now definitely probably didn't start the way anybody planned. No. But I'm sure that the goal we talk about on outlook immediately, kind of what do you see here in 2021? Obviously, we were kind of talking about that a little bit, where we know there's going to be an immediate shortage coming here really quick, if not already. Throughout the year, backside of the year, summer. I think summer is always one of those deals that people they kind of tend to put it off, but you have kids that are at home. They're no longer in a school program where they're able to partake in free lunch programs and stuff like that. Right. So again, the stress comes back into the feeding folks and extra food. I'm going to imagine that the spike happens over the summer, where you have those kids at home that normally those parents could send them, and at least 2 meals out of the day are getting met in the school function. And unfortunately, in our again, even here in the Bryan College Station area, during those time frames where kids are in school, for a lot of kids, those are the only 2 meals they'll get out of the day. Yeah. And the weekend becomes the challenge. That's during school season. The weekend becomes a challenge for those kids to get fed. during the summer, if they're not in a program, not in a summer camp, not in something like that, which again, a lot of people can't afford. That's the first thing they look at, or they don't know about programs that may be around to be able to keep those kids active and involved in the community.
Right.
Then they're at home, and again, the demand goes up, the supply goes down typically, and so now you're met with that deal. So over the summer, do you see that spike?
We definitely see more families coming through our food line, needing that additional supplement, and even our food baskets need to be bigger. We have to increase the amount that we give to each family, just knowing that need's there. So that's just again an increased demand as well. You touched on it well. Kids kind of. We all know, like, if a kid doesn't have activities, there's more likelihood they're getting in trouble and things like that. And so a lot of times we're able to offer summer camp, sending kids to a week of camp, which is both a great thing for helping to keep them occupied, but opening their eyes to new experiences. And as we talk about getting kids out of generational poverty, sometimes it's showing them something new, showing them something outside of the circle that they've only lived in.
Right.
And so that's key and a great thing. So those are, several things that are a part of summer. What those will look like in 2021 as far as summer camp and stuff, that's still a little bit of an unknown. But even when there's not summer camp, we try to provide curriculum or activities to families so that if they are home, or that they've got something more to do. And parents really appreciate that, because a lot of times, it's trying to find an activity that's will entertain your kid or help grab their attention. It can be a difficult thing. And so our team works hard to put those together to make sure we have those available. But then, 2021's also, we realize that we need not only to continue to meet the need, but to provide people with a pathway out of this kind of current situation into self-sufficiency. And for some people, that's a new path they find themselves on because of COVID. And so we're launching a new initiative called Pathway of Hope, which works specifically on the things we talked about today, where it identifies those families that have come to us in crisis or instability. It identifies those barriers that they have, helps to connect them with other agencies, helps to help them to set goals, to break through those barriers, and to eventually reach self-sufficiency. And this isn't something where we just work with a family for a month or two. It's working with families for a year, 2 years, to help them truly get out and on that journey. And so it's really targeting that and making sure that while we're going to continue to have our emergency assistance meet people right there in the need, I kind of call those our life support. Yeah. It keeps you alive. But then we want the life-changing initiative, which is Pathway of Hope. And it's going to take people from crisis and instability to increased stability and into self-sufficiency. And so that comes forward with some increased case management that'll be taking place, as well as us connecting with even more community partners just to assure we're getting families wraparound services. Kids, if they need help in school, mental health, physical health, whatever it may be, we want to bring around the services they need. Parents, if it's something beyond financial assistance, if it's, we need to support this family a little bit longer so that mom and dad can go get a certification or things like that, so that we can get them earning above that poverty level and able to support the family. Those things are what we want to do. And in order to do it, we're assessing those barriers we talked about. What barriers are keeping them from that, so we know what we're targeting to get them to self-sufficiency, but then also their willingness to change. Because like we said, sometimes this generational poverty has become so ingrained that it's going to be a difficult fight as we work with families to get them out of that. But there's a lot of families that are ready for the change. Yeah. They're desiring the change, and they need the help. And a lot of times the reason we call it Pathway of Hope is they've just lost that hope for the future. Yeah. They seem like they just feel stuck where they are. And so we really see this as the thing that will, as they're breaking those barriers, as they're getting through those things, it'll re-inject hope into their situation and a hope for the future, and really help them have that desire to get out of their current situation. And so that's really going to be key, we see, in the response to COVID, because there's so many more families that have found themselves in those situations. And so getting them on that pathway and getting them moving towards self-sufficiency is going to be key.
Do you see upcoming events going virtual and staying virtual?
We're hoping that our luncheon that's set for May 20th, we're hoping that can be in person right now. We do that at the Hilton in College Station, and they've begun to do in-person events. And so right now the plan is for that to be in person on May 20th. And, looking forward to a great event that raises key funds to really help us get through those summer months. We're prepared if, I think now we always have a virtual contingency, but, our hope is that even if May can't happen, we see much, this year's delaying seems more like a possibility if May can't happen. But right now, we're moving forward planning on May and think it's going to be a great event. And I mean, people can, if you're a business owner, you can, sponsor by buying a table, or an individual can buy a ticket or make a donation to that event. And like I said, a lot of those contributions go directly to those services we provide in the summer, whether that's kids to camp or food baskets, and of course summer's coming with the heat. That I think we were all thinking of that this past week, but and that leads to increased utility bills.
Yeah.
And so it's a time again where that need goes up, and so those funds raised there right before for a lot of nonprofits are kind of those dry months financially. That really helps us propel through those months and meet the needs during those months.
So let's talk about goals here, especially on the backside of 2021 as we get to that November and December month.
Yeah.
Volunteer hours, what do you need sustainably to set up what you'd like to do here in town? I mean, what kind of volunteer hours are you looking at from people? And I'm sure that as you set this up, okay, we got X number of pots that need to be manned from this hour to this hour. What does that number look like if you're going to go full run, have them out everywhere that you can possibly put them, every kettle with a bell on it and a person standing there with it? What do you see as needed or projected volunteer hours?
Yeah. So if we were to cover every location, we have 20 locations that we can ring at in Brazos County. We ring about 30 days a year. And then if we were to cover every hour, you're looking at about 6,000 hours of volunteer work, because we ring about a 10-hour day. Our pass that we've ever hit highest we've hit is 1,400. We're hoping that in the years to come, we can move that up to 2,000.
Let me stop you there. 6,000 hours needed.
Yep.
And your past high was what?
1,400 hours.
So I didn't want that to get glazed over in the conversation there. So a deficit of about 4,600 hours.
Right.
Okay.
Or a potential of 4,600.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
4,600
additional hours. Yeah, because we're coming into it. Deficit last year. We're going to fill that this year.
To be filled. And so, the hope is that we can make a big difference in just filling more of those hours.
Right.
And that can be done even if someone just has 1 hour, just going out 1 hour and ringing. Or if, you're part of a small group or a business group, if you can get 8 to 10 people to commit to each take an hour, I mean, that's huge for us, because that means that's a whole spot that we don't have to worry about for that day.
Sure.
Someone goes out in the morning, takes the bucket out, they ring all day, the evening we pick it up. That's a huge blessing. And the thing is, when we have a volunteer compared to a person that we have to pay to go out there, we see about a 40 to 50% increase on donation. And it's what you touched on, just that interaction, that spirit that kind of encourages people to give. And so that's huge for us, and can really increase our ability to serve and help others in the community just by covering all those locations. Like I said, on average, we average about $50 an hour for a volunteer group. So getting to that 2,000 hours of volunteer would be really, really significant for us and what we could provide in the community. And I think it becomes exponential. If we were able to hit 2,000 this year, then a lot of times it's easy because once you go out and get that, you've done that hour, either you want to do another hour or you encourage somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
And so it helps to grow itself just going out and getting engaged. And so that's what we're really looking for. And we're going to push that a lot more with the Christmas in July campaign, trying to get people just to even make a commitment, maybe not locking in the day or time at that point, but saying, hey, when Christmas gets here, you can count on me for 5 hours, and then we'll figure out as we get closer where those 5 hours will be.
Yeah.
But just someone making that commitment, and hopefully that'll get us there to those numbers and those key support we need.
And 5 hours for someone, they're looking at that going, oh, that's a day. That's not really kind of what you want to see out of it. You'd prefer to see that maybe stretched out and 3 shifts or something like that, where we can, you can fill in gaps here. Hey, can you do an hour this day? Can you do 2 hours this day? I mean, that way there's a balance around there. And 5 hours out of your 2-month window, I mean, what is that to you to be able to go out there and do that? And there's always things that go on. The big thing that I know that tends to bring out a lot of people and they make it competitive is the ring off between the mayors and Bryan and College Station and things like that. But, the challenge should go a little bit further than that. If I'm the business and I've got them in front of me, they're out in the door, listen, no, I'm not going to say it. I was going to talk on a little bit about the Walmart side of it, but unfortunately it just becomes kind of a to-do as opposed to a real involvement with it. And I was there through the weird wonky time frames of, well, we used to always be able to set up right here, and now and I'm not talking COVID. This is before COVID. Yeah. Now you got to set up X number of feet from the door, and I'm sure that's even looks a lot different now. But just the movement, like you had said earlier, and I didn't want this to get lost, just the movement of several feet from the door is huge.
Yep.
Because it is the convenience of somebody walking through the door, and you're right there. I don't have to go 15 feet over this way to meet you over here and go back off into it. At the doorway, making it as convenient as possible is the easiest way to get it dropped into the bucket. And so, you'd love to think that those doors, got entrance doors and exit doors, and I end up right here in the middle. That's typically not how that plays out, So, but we really want to encourage people in the immediate need right now that if you can, share out the information to your friends and family that the Salvation Army is needing. And again, online donations, they can go anytime, any day. Yep. Click on a donation. It'll allow you to do any custom donation. Right. There's other options on there to be able to select a dollar amount that are preset on there, but none of those are expected. It's just whatever you can give. And knowing, and again, a part of this podcast is getting that information out to know that the gap is going to be immediate here quick, and that can go to shore that up to get you guys into that May 20th, fundraiser without having a draw pulling away from that money here where we're having this fundraiser, but it's already working in a deficit because we're still trying to recover from what happened during the winter storm. And so, and it could be that long. There could be that kind of pull on there for a long period of time. I know we're talking months away from where we are right now, but that's not going to stop people's situations. Yep. And so, if these guys can either lend time to it, come down to Cavett and help out there at the Salvation Army location, or if they can just go online and donate money. If you don't have the time to do it, but you've got an extra $20 or whatever, roll online, give the donation out, tax deductible. All of these things that you can kind of work to help an organization out and still be a part of that, even if you can't physically be there as a part of that fundraising, to be able to start that process right now, here in the beginning of 2021, not waiting for the 50% mark at November and December to make up everything, because that number may look a lot different here in 2021. It may look a lot different going into November and December. It'd be a lot easier to go in and go, I don't need the 50% in November and December because we raised a bunch of money here at the front side of the year after this disaster. But to the point of what you said earlier is the Bryan College Station area is really good about when we reach a crisis, a particular situation, that people come out of the woodworks to give and to donate and to volunteer their time and that deal. And that's the great thing about living here. It's the great thing about being a part of the community is businesses and people in this community rise up to the occasion. They just have to know what the occasion is. Right. And you got to make that vocal for them so that they know that this is an immediate need to be met. Yep. You see it day in and day out, man. Yeah. I mean, a GoFundMe account pops up for somebody and bam, $50,000 for that person. But when we're talking about an entity that reaches thousands of people throughout the year in your own community, and it has the ability to be able to meet the need, fill the gap, do it all in Jesus' name, and be able to make a commitment back to making their community better, then where else does that money sit, and where else would it be needed more? Yeah. I mean, we do it in our churches. We tithe at the churches. We do it as a part because we know that the churches are actively involved in the community as well too. The Church of the Salvation Army is a part of where you can also rest that money and ensure that money is being spent properly to be able to take care of the needs in your own backyard. And that's where we got to focus on right now. We can't focus in other places in Texas. And, I mean, we were good about when Harvey came to send, money and funds and everything down to the Houston area and Galveston area and all that stuff. But man, this is our own backyard.
That's right.
And if you came out of it and things were great, you didn't lose power, you didn't, pop any lines, you didn't do any of that kind of stuff, great. You were in probably the category of the few, but the majority of people had some kind of experience through this deal. The uncomfortableness of going without power for 3 hours, and man, my house gets really cold. Imagine how cold it gets when you're homeless.
Yeah.
Imagine how cold it gets when you don't have a jacket, when you don't have a blanket, when you don't have the resources. I mean, I've always been raised that if something bad happens, there's always a silver lining somewhere in there, right? That even if my power goes out, at least I have walls and a roof to keep it all off of me. Even if it may be 40 degrees in that house, it's still 6 degrees outside.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are people in this community that don't have that luxury. I mean, a luxury of having shelter even without fire, without heat. I mean, that's a whole other level of miserable. We just see it as miserable because it's not our normal conditions of what we're accustomed to. And unfortunately, we have homelessness and people in our community that always have that need. It's always at their door. And so I'm appreciative of you being here and your wife coming here, that you guys are a part of the community. I'm grateful to have you here to lead the Salvation Army into a growth aspect that I know that y'all, I'm sure sitting over there, you can go, I know what I want to see. I know how to get it there. I just have to get all these things in alignment. But here, since, coming here in 2020, that alignment's probably looked a little wonky for you. And just the ability to be able to get those things into alignment, if we could quit having these little catastrophes happening in between things and start seeing things kind of shoring up, where we can have 70-degree weather and no clouds all the time outside, makes things a little bit easier for you guys too. But I know that it's a challenge to have both husband and wife team coming in here and taking over and being a representative, not just of the Salvation Army. I mean, you guys do this from the calling from Jesus, right? And from the calling that God has placed on y'all's hearts to be a part of this. And that says a lot about, you as a couple. It says a lot about you as leaders here in the community. And so what we wanted to do is get you guys in here to be able to have that conversation, to show the need, and to be able to show kind of where the deficit is at here locally in people's own backyards, because again, I mean, it's like I said, man, I don't see an angel tree I didn't know, but if I hear that there's a demand that's not meeting where we need to be able to supply, if we bridge that gap and get donations out of this, get volunteers out of this, get people moving into action to help the cause, man, we've set out what we've accomplished to do here in this deal, but to really bring it to the forefront, put your face on it. I'm not saying you're the Salvation Army, but locally as a leader here of the Salvation Army, you want to lead it in the best possible way that God has called you to do that. Amen. And so we're just grateful to have you in the community. We hope that you have a long appointment here, that you guys are able to raise your family here for a long period of time. It's a great place to bring your kids in, and what you see here just in the few months that you guys have been here, we've been able to experience for years and years of being here as a part of this community. And we're grateful for the Bryan College Station area who support us as a business. We know that this is the same community that will rise up to meet the needs of everybody here that's going to have immediate demands of stuff that they're going to have to fulfill, or that's going to be required from them by no fault of their own.
Yep.
So if we can be of any assistance to you, please let us know. We'd love to help you guys out, and I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation now. Because I think 2 weeks ago, again, this probably would have looked a lot different. It wouldn't have been 2 hours and 38 minutes. It would have probably been a lot shorter, and we'd have been talking about a lot more programs and things like that. But I really wanted to spend a lot of time with where you were at right now, coming on the backside of this, with it being fresh right now. And that also is the reason why we're going to push this out into the market quickly, so that people can listen to this and hear what the deficits are and where you guys have those immediate needs at, so that we can hopefully help to meet those as well too. So,
well, appreciate that, and appreciate you having us in and getting to share our story a little bit and what all is taking place in Bryan College Station with the Salvation Army.
Welcome to Bryan College Station, man.
Well,
now we're going to show you how the community pulls together and gets it all done. So
awesome.
we're grateful. Tell your wife thank you again for what she does. I know she didn't join us today, but just tell her we're grateful that she's here as well too, and we love having you guys as a couple here and spreading the word and the gospel throughout the community while rising up to meet the needs of people who need it.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Timothy. We appreciate your time. You guys have a great day.